How's it going, everybody? We're back from our little hiatus, and let me be the first one to tell you that I've missed you guys. So much, in fact, that we decided to give you the video you've been waiting for. God of High School's final season. And in this one, we're coming out of the gates running as we give you the full story behind its first arc called Re: The Battle of the Gods. So without further ado, let's get this show on the road. A New World Order. God of High School's Re: The Battle of the Gods storyline starts off with a brief recap of the world's status quo following the world-shattering events of the Ragnarok arc. As the narrator puts it, the world ended during Ragnarok, and no one except us fans and a few major players in the God of High School series know what truly happened. To everyone else, Ragnarok happened because of the treachery of a couple of powerful individuals, Jin Taijin and his grandkid, Jin Mori. At this point in time, the world at large has become so brainwashed with fake news that they've even branded Mori to be Satan himself. This whole fabricated tale goes on to say that the human race was too weak to stand up against these two powerful would-be conquerors. In fact, it was only with the help of Park Mujin and the Six that humanity was able to fend off Taijin and Mori. 7 heroes, 7 weapons, and a battle that lasted 7 days and nights later, the human race emerged as victors, which then ushered in a time of freedom for the whole world. Oh, and just so you know, Mujin has basically become president of the world in the years since Ragnarok, all thanks to the fact that he was able to spin what truly happened during Ragnarok. Our story then moves to the present day, where we see a couple of siblings living in an apartment somewhere in the city getting ready for school. One of them, a girl, cooks breakfast while her brother lies in bed. The two teenagers have their meal shortly after that, as they listen to the news. We find out that a new member of the Six has been inducted into the illustrious group, and it happens to be none other than Q, who has also since struck out after the events of Ragnarok and become sort of a tycoon in South Korea because of his bakery business. And sure, Q might have taken 12 tries before he finally got into the Six. But as the old saying goes, the only victory that matters is the last one. If you didn't know it already, Q actually challenged Doosa Kim to a duel. Long story short, Q won that match, which allowed him to take Kim's place within the Six. The siblings continue listening to the news in the middle of their breakfast, as another reporter gives more exposition about God of High School's current status quo. Namely, we find out that territorial borders all across the globe disappeared after the events of Ragnarok, which effectively ended racism among its various nationalities and ethnic groups. In addition to that, Earth's energy crisis became a thing of the past when humanity discovered and promptly commercialized a new form of energy, which allowed civilization to progress at an accelerated rate. This new form of energy happens to be borrowed power, and it has become pretty much a commodity in this day and age. The narrator goes on to tell us that borrowed power as a resource was worlds apart from fossil fuels. All of this ultimately led to the human race experiencing an unprecedented age of peace and prosperity, a so-called golden age that has never happened throughout history. But then, we also soon find out that although the people in the God of High School universe are living cushy lives, there's still some trouble brewing in paradise. It turns out that there's also an ongoing 3-way conflict happening among Balhae, a non-borrowed power organization led by Lee Soo-jin, Nox, which has since been taken over by Han Dae-wi, and the National Homeless Association, the group that Yu Mira has found herself leading. As the news story goes, these 3 organizations' conflict is growing more and more intense with each passing day, forcing the world government to cordon off certain areas for the sake of public safety. In any case, the siblings finish their breakfast as the girl tells her brother that she's off to school. The boy follows suit after that as he carries a large sack on his back. Later, at Nobleman High School, we see that the boy is actually moonlighting as a supply runner for the rest of the students. His sister notices him passing by her classroom and overhears a couple of her classmates bad-mouthing her brother. They refer to the boy as a loser who comes from the Camellia class, the class where students who have no aptitude for using borrowed power belong to. On the other hand, the boy's sister belongs to the Peony class, which is the class filled with students who have the ability to use borrowed power. The mean girls continue to talk smack about the boy. And to be fair, one of them has a point when she says that she sort of admires him for working with what he got. As she puts it, if you're not good at anything, you should at least be hardworking. Eventually, the boy's sister has enough of the mean girls' cattiness and tells them to shut their mouths. She even reminds the two that her brother used to be some sort of top prospect before attending Nobleman High School, calling him the first person to enter their school at quote-unquote level 1. The mean girls mock her in reply, but just before things escalate, her brother approaches and hands our girl her medicine. In fact, bro's such a cool dude that he even gives the mean girls a couple of free snacks to help his sister get along with them. The mean girls take the freebie and change their tune about our boy as he leaves the classroom. It's here we find out that the boy's name is Mori Dan, Later, Dan heads over to his classroom, aka Camellia class, where he approaches a new student named Seokjin Ji to ask for payment for her services. Ji, aside from being a 19-year-old boy who looks like a middle-aged man, is also a top-tier douche who likes screwing over hardworking guys like Dan who are just trying to make an honest living, as a working student at that. So when Dan attempts to ask for his money, Ji tries to start some smoke with our boy by throwing a 10,000 won bill at his feet. Dan ignores this and just tries to get his pay, but Ji attempts to stop our guy when he bends over to pick up the money. Thankfully, a level 2 student named Jung-Soo Yoon intervenes before Ji could harm Dan. Yoon gives Ji a warning to take it easy, and the fat, questionable dirtbag walks away. Dan thanks Yoon, but he chides off our boy before going his own way. Later in class, a teacher gives a history lesson about what happened in Ragnarok, at least what the world thinks happened during the war. It's yet another retread of the whole Mujin and the Six saves the world story. The teacher goes on to tell the kids in class that one of Mujin's greatest achievements is the taboo, which opened the doors for nearly everyone in the world to be able to use borrowed power. More exposition comes when the teacher tells the class about the anti-global government organization, aka Balhae. The long and short of it is that this group is heavily against Mujin's global government due to the fact that its policies and legislations tend to favor borrowed power users. And given that this organization is against the world government, it's only natural that they're branded as a terror group. Surprisingly enough, we soon discovered that the teacher isn't just some witless schmo who blindly agrees with everything the world government does. In fact, he ends his lecture by telling the class that the world government is the one to blame for what's happening right now with Balhae. As he puts it, Mujin and his regime have relied too heavily on borrowed power, which effectively made most of humanity forget that each person has their own unique personality and abilities. He even uses Taijin as an example when he talks about the true potential of humans, given that Taijin wasn't a borrowed power user. He was just some ultra-swole dude who knew how to kick butts. In the end, the teacher reminds his students to focus on harnessing their own unique talents as well. Too bad none of the kids listen to it, because they're all busy either dozing off or gossiping with their classmates. But at least the teacher manages to get to one of the kids in class, Dan. In any case, class is dismissed, and Dan is left wondering about Taijin, Mori, the Six, and the limits of martial arts. He's only interrupted when Ji tells him to come with him. Later, Ji takes Dan to a construction site and offers him a job. 500,000 won for transferring a mound of sand from the site's ground floor to the building's 3rd floor. Dan takes the job and Ji even pays him half up front. So Dan wastes no time and starts working, while Ji and a few of his delinquent friends watch. It's implied that Ji is just doing this to mess with Dan, thinking that there's no way our boy could move all that sand in one afternoon. However, one of Ji's pals expresses his concerns about this scheme. He thinks that there's actually a chance Dan's going to ace this job. In reply, Ji tells his friends that it really doesn't matter, since he got a couple million won from his dad to do this task. Outsourcing it to Dan allows him to not go through the trouble of actually doing the job at a nominal cost. Ji's a typical lowballing scumbag is what we're saying. On the other hand, another one of his friends tells Ji that there's something he should know about their school, and that is to never lay a finger on Dan. But Ji's too much of a meathead to listen. Instead of heeding his crew's advice, the dude starts rummaging through Dan's bag only to find out that they couldn't even lift it off the ground. Ji is interrupted when Yoon shows up and we soon discover that they have a scuffle scheduled at this very moment. So Yoon and Ji throw down, and Ji reveals that he can use borrowed power when he summons the spirit of a baboon before clashing with Yoon. The two put hands on each other, and Dan even notices the commotion from the 3rd floor of the building. Moments later, we see Ji holding Yoon by the neck before pummeling him with the baboon-powered punches when he refuses to surrender to Ji. Ji prepares to knock the living daylights out of Yoon when Dan grabs him by the arm to tell him that he's done moving all the sand. But Ji's too stupid to honor their deal and instead answers Dan's payment request with a crisp right hook. Seeing this makes all of Ji's friends facepalm themselves, since they just told him not to mess with Dan. On the other hand, Dan just eats up Ji's punch before recomposing himself and respectfully asking for his pay again. But once more, Ji acts like a total meathead and repeatedly socks Dan in the face. Still, Dan refuses to fight back. All the while, Ji's friends can only tell their idiotic pal to stop attacking our boy. As you'd expect, their pleas fall on deaf ears, and Ji continues to pummel Dan. But his rampage is cut short when a fist lands right on top of Ji's head to reveal that Dan's sister, whose name is revealed to be Ahan Dan, has come to the rescue. We also get a mercifully short introduction to who Ahan really is. It turns out that she's pretty much the top dog of Nobleman High School, which also goes by the name Apricot Flower High School. So much so that Ahan has been dubbed as the Witch. And if you mess with the witch's brother, you can expect your butt to be thoroughly kicked the way she's beating on Ji right now. Apart from that, we also find out that Ahan's powers seem to be derived from ice, as one of her legs grows shards of ice when she puts Ji in his place. On top of that, we discover that Ahan's use of her borrowed power appears to have a bit of a blowback, as it necessitates the need for her to use a crutch for her left leg, the same one that manifests her ice powers. In any case, Dan carries Ahan over his shoulder and the two siblings go home after wrecking the construction site and giving G a first-hand lesson on why you shouldn't mess with Dan. The next day, we discover that G managed to pull some strings, which has now allowed him to transfer from the Camellia class to the Peony class, the same group where Ahan and all the other borrowed power users of their school belong to. And say what you will, but there's clearly something wrong with G's mental state, given that he instantly goes by prison rules when he enters Peony class. That is to say, he tries to look for the classroom's top dog to try and beat him up so he could take their place. His plans instantly fall flat when he comes across one of his new classmates, Sukho Ju. G tries to assault Ju when he directs him toward his proper seat in class, but G is almost immediately humbled when his fist starts gushing blood after he tries punching Ju. On top of that, G caves when Ju looms over him and tells the meathead to fix his eyeglasses. This makes G think that Ju is the Peony class alpha, but he changes his tune a moment later as he notices Ju cave when another one of their classmates tells him to be quiet. Again, G thinks this new guy is the alpha, but he changes his opinion when another dude intimidates the guy who first intimidated Ju. This goes on for a couple more sequences until G loses his marbles and accidentally knocks over one of his other classmates' lunch. The owner of this wasted meal is a tall dude named Jongjin Bang, who also happens to be one of the so-called 4 divine gods of Apricot Flower High School. Just to give you guys an idea, the school's 4 divine gods are basically their top students. Now, Bang isn't too happy that G wasted his perfectly good hamburger, so he literally tries to eat G alive. However, Bang stops when Ahan tells him to let go of that weak kid, G, and just start studying. Bang tries to start some smoke with Ahan, but she reminds him about last year. Specifically, Ahan beat Bang so badly that he almost lost the ability to walk. However, Bang continues to try and talk smack, telling Ahan she's not going to do that to him ever again. Plus, we also get a brief introduction to this guy, and it turns out that Bang becomes more powerful the more he eats. Oh, and he's also known by the nickname White Mustache of Apricot Flower High. All of a sudden, another one of the 4 divine gods enters the scene. This time, it's a level 6 necromancer going by the name of Jua Wu, aka the Shanks of Apricot Flower High. A second later, and we meet the third member of the 4 divine gods, Sunny, who's also known as the Fire Fist of Apricot Flower High. Jua Wu and Sunny trade barbs with each other, with Jua Wu accusing Sunny of getting a boost surgery, which is a procedure that artificially increases your borrowed power. Sunny doesn't deny this and hits Jua Wu with a far better insult, calling him poor. On the other hand, Ahan gets enough of this testosterone contest and tells the 3 dudes to shut the hell up. Bang, Jua Wu, and Sunny freeze in place the moment they hear Ahan's command, because not only is she the last of the 4 divine gods of the school, but Ahan also happens to be a level 7 student nicknamed Aokiji of Apricot Flower High School. The air in the classroom gets tense and everyone thinks a fight is about to break out during the 4 divine gods standoff. But then, the quartet of top students in Peony class each stop in their tracks when one more person walks in and tells them to stop. This newcomer has enough clout that even the so-called 4 divine gods' eyes widen in fear the second he steps into the room. We soon find out that this person is a guy named Executive V. His power levels aren't revealed at this point, but it's safe to assume it's higher than those of the school's 4 divine gods, given how they all froze up when he arrived. But V isn't here to tussle. Instead, he tells the kids to break it up, since fighting outside of the God of High School tournament would render them disqualified from the competition. Dan suddenly appears and notices Ahan looking a little worse for wear, so he escorts her to the school clinic. On the other hand, V takes an interest in Dan after seeing the boy. Another member of the institution's staff walks toward V and introduces the boy's name to him. This other man then debriefs V about Dan's backstory, specifically how he was the first ever student to enroll at Apricot Flower High School possessing level 1 borrowed power. He goes on to tell V that Dan has outstanding physical strength but is sorely lacking in his abilities as a borrowed power user. V finds himself even more curious about Dan after listening to all of this. At the same time, Ahan has a fever dream while at the school clinic. First, her dream shows another retelling of the world's status quo after the events of Ragnarok. You already know it, so we won't get into it again. The long and short of it is that Mujin has painted himself as humanity's savior, while Jin Mori is framed as the human race's enemy. More importantly, this sequence ties into the next part of Ahan's dream, which happens to be a flashback to when she and Dan were little kids. It's revealed that the whole fake story about Mujin's heroics during Ragnarok inspired Dan to pursue a career path towards becoming the next world president just like Mujin. But then, his ambitions were put on hold when Dan found out that he only had a measly amount of borrowed power coursing through him. On the other hand, Ahan was touted as a child prodigy when it came to borrowed power. Dan isn't a jealous little kid though. Instead of getting bitter, he took it upon himself to support Ahan in realizing her fullest potential. It's even implied that Dan was the one responsible for Ahan's limp. which is hinted to have happened when she accepted Dan's advice to form a direct contract with the source of her borrowed power. On the bright side, this just brought Dan and Ahan closer, as Dan vowed to live vicariously through his sister by helping her become president of the world. Make no mistake though, Dan still wants that job for himself, but now he was willing to let Ahan take it on first before he does. In her dream, Ahan recalls how she also made a vow to protect her brother. However, Ahan comes to the realization that she might be stepping all over her brother's dream to achieve her own ambitions. Ahan then wakes up to find Dan watching over her. Dan gives his sister some medicine. She takes it, but not before reminding Dan that he should focus on training his borrowed power instead of working his part-time job as a runner. She then reminds him about his dream to become president of the world, to which Dan reiterates that he plans on helping Ahan get that job before he does. The two then go back to their apartment and Ahan starts training for an upcoming competition called the Preliminary Tournament. We then get a mercifully short exposition about what the Preliminary Tournament is. Basically, it's eliminators for the main God of High School tournament. As Ahan puts it, the Preliminary Tournament not only requires mastery of your abilities, but also a bit of luck, given how fierce the competition is. She then concludes that her next goal is to increase her borrowed power's duration. Dan, on the other hand, heads out to the nearby supermarket to do some shopping. He has a chance encounter with Yoon, who turns out to be working part-time at the same establishment. The two hang out shortly after that, and Yoon apologizes to Dan for being a bit of a jerk to him before, back when he brushed him off after rescuing Dan from G. They then start talking about their side hustles, which gives way for Yoon to reveal that his ultimate dream is to become a mixed martial arts master. We get more acquainted with Yoon when he tells Dan how much he idolizes half of the members in the old iteration of the Six, given that they were pure martial artists. Yoon even lets it slip how he admires Jin and Mori, since they also have the same martial arts background. The long and short of it is that Yoon looks up to people who rely on their own strength and talents to get by instead of using borrowed power as a crutch. As for Dan, he respects Yoon's dream but reminds his new friend that Jin and Mori are war criminals. Yoon notices that Dan's mood has taken a downturn after mentioning Ragnarok, which makes him wonder if Dan is a war orphan. Yoon asks Dan about his dreams, and as you'd expect, our boy tells his new friend about his whole plan to becoming world president after Ahan. And well, Dan's fighting spirit and moxie actually makes Yoon admire Dan and the two become pals. Later, Ahan comes back to their apartment to see that Dan has prepared a spread on their dinner table. Dan tells his sister that all that food is for their parents' upcoming memorial service. In reply, Ahan apologizes to her brother for being a bit cold to him recently and the two patch things up. Not long after, the God of High School's preliminary tournament begins, as an MC welcomes contestants and spectators alike to the event. Executive V serves as the judge of the event, and we find out that this competition isn't going to be a simple beat-em-up like we've seen before. As the MC puts it, there is only one flag stuck in the tournament's ground, and the contestant's goal is to retrieve it. Whoever moves the flag to the destination and then sticks it in the ground will be the winner of the preliminaries. The MC goes on to tell everyone that the whole goal of the game is basically to have the last man standing plant the flag, which will then determine the true winner of the game. Meanwhile, Dan continues to hustle on the stands, as he hawks snacks and beverages to the other spectators. He overhears one of the young audience members gripe about how the preliminary tournament is pretty much fixed in favor of top students like Ahan and the 4 divine gods of Apricot Flower High School. But Dan, being the optimist that he is, encourages the guy to just keep on working on good old-fashioned martial arts to achieve their dreams. In any case, the competition officially starts, and Apricot Flower High's 4 divine gods immediately get to work. Sunny activates his super speed to get to the flag before anyone else. Meanwhile, Bang uses his calorie powers and flexes so hard that his clothes rip off his body. On the other hand, Jwawu summons his borrowed power, the Necromancer, and turns a few of the other contestants into his zombie underlings. The newly turned zombies and Necromancer reach Bang and take a bite out of him. Everyone thinks Bang is going to turn into Jwawu's mindless underling at that point, but his combined willpower to get revenge against Ahan and body mass index allows Bang to break through Jwawu's attack. Bang overhead slams the Necromancer and prepares to hunt down Ahan. Meanwhile, Ahan continues to make her way towards the flag. She notices a few other competitors tailing her, so our girl uses her ice powers to blast them away. While all this is happening, trouble brews somewhere else, at the eastern city wall. The guards posted they're mobilized when they get notified of a security breach. It's coming from a certain section of the city wall, so the soldiers rush toward the location. They get there to see a crack forming on the barrier of the city, so the soldiers try to go for a preemptive strike by shooting down the wall in hopes of hitting whatever is on the other side. A rain of bullets later, and the commanding officer tells his men to stand down. The whole place falls silent for a moment, but it's interrupted when a cute little lion dog pops into existence right in front of them. You might even recognize this critter as none other than Heite. And if you're already familiar with Heite, you know who this magical creature always accompanies. That's exactly what the soldiers find out when they try to shoot down the person Heite's with. Han Dae-wee. Dae-wee effortlessly defends himself against the hail of bullets with a force field. Following that, he takes down the entire platoon of city guards with his patented Blue Dragon technique. And from there, Dae-wee and Hae-tae make their way towards the city as the karate master tries to remember the last time he's been here. The next chapter of God of High School starts with a classic exposition dump that explains the rules of the preliminary tournament yet again. But at least there are a few new takeaways from this particular narration. One, we find out that this new world order that Mugen built after Ragnarok works under a class system where you're pretty much born into certain positions in society. As such, the God of High School tournament is the only chance a person can move up in society with their abilities alone. According to the narrator, participating in the main God of High School tournament and reaching at least the quarterfinals brings a whole lot of benefits to the contestant. Reaching the quarterfinals of the main tournament instantly gives you the title of executive along with other perks, such as money, travel, a pension, and freedom. On the other hand, becoming the undisputed champ of the main God of High School tournament entitles the winner to take Mugen's place and become the world president. So you can understand why the preliminary tournament is so fierce. Everyone just wants to look out for number one and move up in life. On a side note, we also discover that the entire venue of the preliminary tournament is happening within a walled-off arena. Now back to the present, and we see the competition becoming fiercer by the minute. Jwawu sends out a gang of zombies toward Ahan, but she easily knocks him away with a single blow. It's also here where we discover that Ahan is a fan favorite as far as prospective preliminary tournament contenders are concerned. In the middle of the arena, Ahan prepares herself knowing that the other contestants are going to gang up on her. Not too far away, Sunny channels his trademark technique called Thunder God by summoning his so-called dragon. The spectators and MCs know what's up. They even nicknamed him Pikachu. Soon enough, we find out that they keep calling Sunny a Pokemon because his Thunder God technique is actually a manifestation of his borrowed power, the Thunder Dragon. In this state, Sunny is able to literally shock anyone around him with 1,000,000 volts of electricity should they get close to him. As a matter of fact, the other preliminary tournament contestants get a first-hand experience of this when they get electrocuted, as Sunny walks along the arena. All the while, V watches the contest and doesn't hide his amusement seeing Sunny's borrowed power. Sunny then has a short flashback where he remembers the previous preliminary tournament, the same one where Ahan nearly tore off his arm with her ice powers. In the present, Sunny gets all hyped for payback. He shoots Ahan with piercing energy that cuts through her ice wall and right through her midsection. Everyone is surprised to see that Sunny was able to release this technique, given that it combines two elements, lightning and fire. Sunny's affinity is with lightning, but he's now also able to harness the fire element all thanks to his performance-enhancing surgery, aka the borrowed power boost upgrade he got before the start of the school year. Sunny prepares to deliver Ahan the killing blow and Bang sends him flying with an overhand right that hits him square in the face. The audience gets confused, thinking that Bang and Ahan have formed an alliance. However, they all soon find out that Bang just wants to put hands on Ahan himself. He tries to crush Ahan's head, but a horde of Jwawu zombies jump in to ambush Bang. It turns out that while every other divine god was busy trying to get to Ahan, Jwawu had been filling his ranks with zombies. Chaos ensues as Sunny recovers from Bang's hit and toasts more contestants with his electricity. All of a sudden, the competitors stop in their tracks when they feel a tremor rock the entire arena. Not too far away, V is in front of his computer researching Ahan. We also discover at the same time that Ahan was the same person who caused the tremors in the middle of the battlefield. To V's surprise, he finds out that Ahan is no ordinary borrowed power user, and soon enough, we get a huge glimpse at Ahan's abilities when she summons what V calls the most powerful and terrifying borrowed power, Second Child, Lot, aka one of the three princes of Natak. From there, Ahan issues everyone a challenge, to come at her all at once. In the blink of an eye, the first half of the preliminary contest ends, as the announcer tells everyone that the organizers are going to need some time to rearrange the arena after Ahan's clinic against the rest of the competitors. We see a winded Ahan who appears to be the only one left standing after the most recent exchange. But don't worry guys, God of High School is not going to blue ball us with the details. We immediately get a play-by-play of what's happened during Ahan's hot streak preceding the first half break. And well, it's a performance for the ages to say the least. It turns out that Ahan not only dispatched a bunch of random players on the field, but she single-handedly put each of the other 4 divine gods of Apricot Flower High School in their place. In a flashback, the clash opens with Ahan taking a group of random dudes with a single wave of her Ice Thorn's ability. The whole performance is likened to the second coming of a true fighting god, and they haven't even seen the sparks fly just yet. That's because Bang tries to get the jump on our girl right after she takes care of the random contestants. The buff, calorie-powered contestant tries to crush Ahan with a hammer fist, but she easily blocks it before sending away Bang with a burst of ice. Sunny sees an opening and attempts to backstab Ahan with a lightning strike, But she counters with her own ice shield and gives the term snowflake a whole different meaning when she blocks Jwawoo's follow-up assault in the middle of her confrontation with Sunny. From there, Ahan brings the beatdown on her fellow Apricot Flower High Divine Gods. She knocks out Bang with a solid 1-2 combination before straight up committing manslaughter when she twists Jwawoo's neck 180 degrees. At least Sunny fares marginally better when he finds another opening in the clash and manages to hit Ahan on the side with a lightning strike. Sunny prepares to finish the job with a follow-up attack, but he freezes in place when Ahan beats him to the punch with a warning shot from her ice spear. In the stands, Ju goes on to monologue about how Apricot Flower High School is basically the top learning institution for borrowed power users. That is to say, even the perceived losers of Camellia class have the aptitude to become the top dog if they enrolled at another school. And given that Ahan is the best of the best, it's no surprise she took care of business in the ring. Oh, and we finally get an update on what's happened to that meathead G, as we find out that he's become Ju's gopher at this point. In fact, Ju blames G for missing out on the preliminary tournament after he broke his hand putting this idiot in his place. In any case, the first half of the contest ends and the participants are given a breather from the action. Dan walks up to his sister and grabs her by the cheeks. He knows that Ahan did something bad. She's been purposely not taking her meds for a month now, despite Dan's efforts to make her do it. Being the good brother that he is, he carries a clearly tuckered out Ahan on his back and tells one of the other contestants to withdraw Ahan's name from the competition if she doesn't come back after the break. Shortly after, Dan takes his sister to the clinic. The doctor asks Ahan why she's not taking her meds, and she replies that it prevents her from activating all of her powers. The doctor understands where she's coming from, but this doesn't change her mind from pulling Ahan out of the preliminary competition early for fear of what might happen to her body if she continues. With no other choice, Ahan accepts the doctor's decision. Curiously enough, V steps in and tells the siblings that he has a proposal for them. In the present, the tournament announcer declares that Ahan isn't fit to continue with the contest. To make up for her absence, the hosts have come up with a rule that allows someone else to serve as Ahan's substitute. And, well, we find out that V's proposal involves having Dan participate in the preliminary tournament as Ahan's sub. All the other contestants think this is some bad joke, but they just roll with it in the end. On the other hand, one of the staff members from Apricot Flower High asks V why he came up with this decision. It's revealed that V has been digging into Dan's background ever since he first laid eyes on the boy. As it stands, Dan's data shows that he's gotten high marks in every physical category even though he has no aptitude for borrowed power techniques. In the present, V answers his colleague that he's just curious to see what Dan can really do, while the boy prepares himself for the contest's second half. Our story then moves the clock back to when Ahan heard V's proposal and we see her struggling to get to her feet to stop Dan from participating in the contest. Her efforts fall flat, however, when the doctor, who's revealed to be a borrowed power user, puts her to sleep using her borrowed power hypnos. Back to the present, and the second half of the preliminary tournament formally starts. Dan wastes no time hoofing it towards the main objective of the game, the flag. But our boy is forced to hit the brakes when Jwawoo's zombies pounce on him and Dan's face lands square on Bang's back fist. And just to make sure Dan stays down, Sunny even ganks him with a single thunderbolt. The other contestants focus on one another right after this, which makes them fail to notice Dan immediately recovering from the hits he took. In the meantime, Bang starts to notice he's getting extra beefy, as if each and every one of his muscle fibers is possessed by a spirit. Bang starts to realize that he can do anything he wants, and he starts by punching poor Sunny right in his neck to send him flying. Unknown to Bang, this power-up he's experiencing actually comes from the bites he took from Jwawoo's zombies. On top of that, it's not really a gift. It's more of a sneaky tactic that Jwawoo uses to allow Bang to fully become one of his zombies. A second later, Jwawoo's plans for Bang come to fruition, as the gluttonous brood completely falls under his spell. And let's not forget that Jwawoo still has a horde of zombies under his command. Jwawoo then sets his eyes on Sunny, but the dude is able to fend off the zombie army with a technique called the Electro Tree. Sunny even talks smack and tells his rival that he's forgotten the main point of this contest. It's a race to get to the flag. So Sunny uses his super speed to run towards the game's main objective. However, everyone is taken by surprise when they notice Dan zoom past each and every one of them on his way towards the flag. A quick flashback reveals that Dan has scars all over his body. More importantly, we find out that he got these scars back during the Great War. In the present, Dan is fully locked in as he hoofs his way towards the flag. Sunny, on the other hand, can only accept that there's no way he can catch up to Dan in spite of his borrowed power. In the end, Dan manages to grab the flag and raise it over his head. Everyone, of course, can't believe what they're seeing. But here's the thing. Dan isn't just bad at using borrowed power, it seems he also has poor comprehension regarding the game's rules. Instead of grabbing the opportunity to plant the flag at its designated location in order to win the game, Dan just waves the flag around until Bang jumps in and steals it from him. Bang then rushes towards the designated location, plants the flag, and wins the whole thing. We find out that Jwawoo's swollenness manages to overcome Jwawoo's spell, which explains how he's not a zombie anymore. Aside from that, all the other contestants start calling Dan an idiot for not understanding the rules of the game. Bang is announced as the winner, while it still hasn't sunk into Dan how he just lost what may very well be the most important game he's played in his life. Somewhere else, inside one of the world government's secret facilities, a bunch of scientists have just wrapped up a recent brainwashing operation on one of their soldiers. It's funny, too, that the world government uses images of Daewee mowing down their operatives for these brainwashing operations. In a different room within the facility, Mujin watches over an unconscious Giju Moon, who's currently recuperating from a grave wound he suffered. We soon learn that Giju got this injury not too long ago when he tussled with the so-called White Witch of the West, aka Ymira. Mujin looks at Giju's scar and can't believe how a powerful warrior like him got sliced up like butter. We even get a glimpse of how Mira cleaved the dude, and it's a clean hit. This makes Mujin wonder how far Mira has gotten, especially considering she was able to take out someone like Giju, a guy who has the power to self-heal. Mujin's musings are interrupted when one of his employees informs him about the trouble happening in the Eastern Barrier. As the guy puts it, the wall collapsed again while their agents were repairing it. We then get an immediate answer to what exactly happened here. It turns out that Daewee was the one who did a number on the Eastern Barrier, and he did so without breaking a sweat. Specifically, Daewee just placed his palm on a section of the wall and used his weak force technique to make large patches of the barrier to crumble. From there, Daewee just walks into the city and even comments how much of a wuss Mujin is for trying to hide behind a literal wall. Back in the facility, Mujin realizes who they're up against and prepares to make moves against the new head of Nox. While this is happening, Jwawoo has come to V's office in the aftermath of the preliminary contest to plead his case. According to him, he should be awarded the win, since Bang was under his control when the dude took the flag from Dan and planted it in its spot. V acts as a mediator between Jwawoo and Bang. He asks Bang if this is true, so of course he denies it. This enrages Jwawoo, who even provides solid points as to why he should have gotten the victory. For one, Bang's pupils were luckily unfocused and his whole body was bloodshot when he stole the flag from Dan, indicating that he was still under Jwawoo's control. Again, Bang denies this, which ultimately leads V to adjourn their meeting while he analyzes the facts. Shortly after, V calls Dan to his office and asks him about the incident. V goes on to add that Dan's answer to his question will determine if there's going to be a redo of the preliminary tournament. Later, Dan pays his sister a visit and apologizes for losing the game. Ahan is just happy that her brother's not hurt, and Dan bids her farewell. Ahan then pulls out her phone and watches footage of Dan's performance during the game, which triggers her insecurities and makes her lash out. Unknown to her, Dan is just in front of her doorway, and he hears her throw her phone at the door behind him. Later, Jwawoo rants about how Dan ruined the whole game, but Sunny tells him to shut it. After all, it was Bang who ended up winning the initial contest. This does nothing to calm down Jwawoo, and hey, the boy has a point. On one hand, he finds it extremely peculiar that Dan didn't become one of his zombies after a bunch of them bit him. Plus, there's that weird vibration they all felt when Dan ran past them earlier. Hearing all this, Sunny chalks Dan's performance as a result of coming out fresh in the second half of the game, while he and the rest of the other contestants were already half gassed out after playing it since the first half. All in all, Sunny concludes that Dan's seemingly impressive performance isn't as surprising as it looks. It's just beginner's luck. Jwawoo drops the topic, but he still isn't convinced. He thinks there really is something that Dan is hiding, especially considering that not even Sunny's upgrades and fully activated borrowed power were able to catch up to Dan when they tried going after him in the initial game. That evening, Ahan trains in hopes of beating Dan's sprinting record. However, she soon finds out that she still lags behind her brother in this department. The next day, V calls in Bang to his office to inform him that they'll be revoking his victory in the first game and will be holding a redo of the preliminaries. This comes after V further reviewed the information that's been presented to him regarding the matter. On the other hand, Bang suspects that Dan played a part in this. In the present, Daewee reaches the gates of an unidentified school, and we learn that he's looking for a so-called candidate that Xiao Chen told him about, who happens to be someone at this institution. God of High School's story then visits the flashback from the previous evening again, where we see Dan noticing Ahan coming home late after training. He then remembers the meeting he had with V, where the executive entices him to give him the quote-unquote correct answer to his question about Bang's mental state during the initial preliminary competition so that Ahan could participate again. The next day, Dan goes to school as usual, carrying his large rucksack of wares to hawk all around the school. He's surprised to find out that he's become Mr. Popular all of a sudden, all thanks to his performance during the first preliminary competition. Bandwagoners and hangers-on then start sucking up to Dan. Yoon and Ahan also notice this on their way to school. That same morning, the Camellia class also receives a new student, and it's a boy who even the teacher can't determine whether he belongs in this room or the Peony class. In any case, this new student wears a hood and carries what looks like a pool cue case on his back. The teacher tells him to introduce himself, and the boy writes down his name on the blackboard, Mori Jung. This causes a stir inside the classroom, given that he shares half the same name as Dan. Later, during break, Dan starts getting back on the hustle and notices that his newfound popularity has also increased business. Dan spots Jung, but he chooses not to interact with the new kid since he's sleeping on his desk. In the meantime, a couple of kids from the Camellia class get into a heated argument, which quickly boils into an all-out fight between the two. The other students make a whole meal out of it and round up everyone to watch the scuffle. Yoon approaches Dan and points to the two random kids fighting in front of them, telling his friend that it was because of Dan that even poor losers in the Camellia class are now all hyped up. Simply put, Dan gave everyone in his class hope that even losers like them could give students from the Peony class a run for their money. Meanwhile, inside Peony class, the same mean girls from before start bothering Ahan. They gush over Dan, but this is just all a ploy to give Ahan an underhanded comment about how her brother is better than her. Ahan just brushes off the two chicken heads and goes out to train. When she leaves, another one of her classmates tells the mean girls to lay off Ahan, but the two busybodies tell her that it's all part of their strategy to mentally break Ahan. It's all competition, something their classmate understands as the natural order of things in Peony class. Meanwhile, Jung walks around school as if he's looking for someone. He passes by 3 of the 4 divine gods of Apricot Flower High, who fail to spot him. Ahan continues to try and beat her brother's sprint record, but still hasn't cracked it just yet. Dan walks up to Ahan and hands her medicine. At this point, the frustration gets to Ahan, so she ends up lashing out at her brother. But she immediately backpedals and apologizes to Dan when she realizes she's just being bitter about everything that's happened in the preliminaries. From there, Ahan vows that she won't be taking any shortcuts to participate in the God of High School tournament anymore. In response, Dan apologizes to her as well. When Ahan asks why, our story goes to another flashback showing what Dan told V during their next meeting. It turns out that Dan told the truth about Bang, that he wasn't under Jwawoo's control when he took the flag and planted it during the first preliminary tournament. That is to say, Bang actually deserves the W. V isn't surprised that his scheme to lure Dan into lying didn't work. Regardless, he proceeds with his plan for a redo of the preliminary tournament. Somewhere else, we see Bang helping out a couple of janitors clean up the arena. They soon notice that the ground they've been sweeping has seemed to sink, but Bang instantly recognizes this spot as the same one where he took the flag from Dan. Bang starts to think that Dan is more powerful than he lets on, but he brushes off the thought and goes back to sweeping. At the end of the school day, Dan and Ahan are walking home when Jung suddenly approaches them. Jung points to Dan and tells him that he must be the guy Jung has been looking for, the strongest kid in school. Before Dan could explain himself, however, Ahan butts in and tells Jung that she's the one he's looking for. In turn, Jung scopes out Ahan from head to toe, particularly noticing her headband in the process. Oh, and we see that Jung's face resembles that of a certain Monkey King that we've seen in God of High School in the past. Anyway, Jung's eyes get that trademark cross-shaped glimmer as he raises his hand and tries to touch Ahan's face. However, Jung stops when Dan grabs him by the wrist. Jung gets back to his senses and apologizes to the siblings before walking away. Ahan tries to tell something she felt about Jung to Dan, but chooses to drop it and the kids head home. Another day passes and Dan is just happy that his errand boy business is booming right now. Jung spots him from his desk and comments on how weird it is that everyone keeps ordering Dan around but isn't shunned as a gopher. A classmate overhears this and pretty much debriefs Jung about the whole implicit "you mess with Dan, you mess with Ahan" rule that the school has in place. Jung wonders if Ahan is really as strong as everybody says. This makes his classmate tell him all about how Ahan possesses the power of Lot. Hearing Lot's name gets Jung all excited, but he ultimately feigns disinterest in the matter. A second later, Dan and the rest of the Camellia class are taken by surprise when Ahan barges in to brag about her latest sprint record to her brother. Dan's happy that Ahan's working hard and follows her on her way out. Suddenly, a PA announcement tells Ahan, Jwawoo, and Sunny to come to the principal's office right away. So Dan heads over to the school's rooftop to get some air. Jung spots him and the two boys look at the gigantic remnant from Ragnarok that's embedded in the middle of the ocean, Mori's staff, Yoi. Jung starts talking about the Great War and how about Yoi has since become an anti-war monument before going into a long-winded recap about the things that happened during Ragnarok, or at least what the general public are aware of. You already know it, about how Daewee, the Sage of the East, Mira, the Witch of the West, and Sujin's Balhae banded with the so-called Demon King, Jaekondesung, to try and destroy the entire world. On a more interesting note, we do get a clear glimpse of what Korea's geography now looks like, thanks to Jung's lengthy story. It turns out that not only were traditional territorial borders rearranged in the aftermath of Ragnarok, but Korea itself has become an archipelago after the Great War. Mori's old gigantic staff sits right in the middle where huge regions of both North and South Korea used to be. What's more interesting, on the other hand, is when Jung tells Dan about an alternative take concerning the Great War. Now, we fans and readers already know about this, but most characters from God of High School have no idea. Specifically, Jung relates the story about how Jaconda-sung was actually a warrior who fought to save the world, and the reason that he is despised in this day and age is because the current heads of the world government betrayed him. However, Dan cuts off Jung's story and stresses that the Monkey King was a true villain who murdered countless people during Ragnarok. Dan then respectfully tries to end the conversation, but Jung tells him he wants to clarify one thing before he leaves. Meanwhile, Ahan, Jwabu, and Sunny are debriefed that there's going to be a redo of the preliminaries. Back on the rooftop, Jung asks Dan why on earth Ahan possesses the same headband that Mori used to wear. More importantly, Jung grills Dan for pretending to be a fool in the eyes of other people. Jung surmises that Dan's doing this to make sure that Ahan remains in the spotlight in spite of the fact that Dan possesses immense powers within him. Their conversation suddenly takes a turn for the dark when Jung sort of threatens Dan that he'll have no choice but to test his skills if Dan continues hiding his true nature. However, Jung instantly takes it back and clears the air. He says he's just joking and apologizes to Dan, but their conversation is interrupted when Jung suddenly takes a punch to the face that sends him flying off of the rooftop. That's because Bang has arrived, and he's ready to put hands on Dan, thinking it was his fault that his victory in the initial preliminary tournament was struck off the record. At the same time, Ahan and other students of the peony class see Jung hurtling several stories down from their window. Ahan becomes concerned that Dan is in trouble. On the rooftop, Bang has his mind set on kicking Dan's butt. Dan tries to defuse the situation, but Bang is too traumatized and angry to listen to anything else right now. Bang gets ready to strike down Dan, while Ahan rushes to the rooftop. She's too late to stop Bang though. On the bright side, they soon realize that Bang's fist stops mid-punch when Jung jumps in to block it with his leg. Meanwhile, Daewee talks to someone on the phone who also happens to be the same person he's looking for. Daewee's not too thrilled to discover that this person just transferred schools today and realizes he's at the wrong place. Back on the rooftop, Bang takes a hard hit to the gut when Jung uses an orang elbow strike on him. The impact is so strong that it forms a crater on Apricot Flower High's rooftop. God of High School's next episode opens with Bang's relatives. Now we learn that Bang actually comes from a hard-working family that runs a diner in the city, and he's a menopausal baby too. On top of that, his mom and dad bust their butts day in and day out to make sure that Bang achieves his dream of becoming a God of High School tournament champ. Now, if you thought Bang was just a one-note jerk this whole time, then you're probably not paying attention. For one, we already know he's a good guy deep down when he helped those janitors with cleanup duty. Then there's this. Bang is well aware of the sacrifices his family has made for him, which explains why he's gotten so messed up by this whole deal with the preliminaries. We're not saying putting hands on the perceived class snitch is the best way to go about things, but we understand where Bang is coming from. And right now, this huge dude isn't doing so hot, as Bang can only recoil and hurl after eating up Jung's orang elbow strike. As a matter of fact, Jung's attack causes so much of a ruckus that the rest of the school students head over to the rooftop to see what's going on. One random kid is super confused to see Bang get dunked on by a guy who supposedly only has a 2.5 power level. This makes a few of the students wonder if the 4 divine gods aren't as strong as they're advertised. Meanwhile, Jwabu tries to step up to Jung and basically tells him that he got a lucky shot over Bang. He and Sunny try to do damage control and save face in front of the other students. After all, one of their ranks just got elbowed so hard in the gut by a supposed loser that he threw up his entire lunch all over the rooftop. So Sunny approaches Bang and urges his classmate to drop it. He also tells the other students to go back to their classrooms and keep this whole debacle a secret from the faculty under penalty of becoming one of Jwabu's zombies. On the other hand, Jung tries to explain himself to the other 2 divine gods of the school, telling Sunny and Jwabu that Bang was the guy who started this whole mess after he sucker punched our boy. But Jwabu gets all foggy and instead uses his necromancer to bite into Jung's shoulder and turn him into a zombie. Jung just eats it up before teleporting right in front of Jwabu's face and ordering him to get his borrowed power off him. And just to show how Jung is not one to be messed with, he uses his mysterious abilities to blind Jwabu on the spot. But then, Sunny jumps in and blasts Jung with a thunderbolt and threatens him to keep his mouth shut about this whole deal. Again, Jung eats up the technique, though he clearly expresses how tired he is of getting sucker punched today. Sunny can feel Jung's aura change, and he nearly wusses out. Thankfully, Jung ultimately chooses to defuse the situation and let bygones be bygones. He apologizes for making such a racket and promises him that he'll keep his head low from now on. However, things get worse when Bang suddenly springs into action, grabs Jung, and slams him into the ground. To make matters worse, Jwabu acts like a total weasel and decides to double-team Jung with the help of his zombification powers. Jung notices he can't use his left arm to soften Bang's slam, and they end up blowing a hole in the rooftop and into the floor below them. From there, Bang continues to barrage Jung with punches that even Ahan can't believe where this roided-up dude got his second wind. Things get so heated that Bang summons his borrowed power, Erisikthon, and continues to assault Jung. However, his offense is stopped when Jung finds an opening and counters with a question mark kick. The other students notice Jung's power levels rising before their very eyes, and their gauges mark his power to be now at level 6. Jwawu tries to pile on and stop Jung. Too bad for them, because Jung's power levels increase so much that the gauges don't even know what to tell them anymore. And just like that, Jung turns the tide of battle around when he uses a technique called Re-Taekwondo, Sia to kick Bang right in the family jewels before following up with a leg sweep he calls Tangyudgi. With Bang out of the picture, Jung sets his sights on Jwawu and gives him a good old-fashioned Baekdu-style knee to the face. Jwawu is able to block it, but Jung transitions to a Re-Taekwondo backknock technique to create an opening and kick Jwawu right in his backstabbing face. Sunny tries to get a piece of the action by bull-rushing Jung with his Thunder Dragon, but all this does is put him in a coma when Jung gets to work on him. When the dust settles, Jung points to a clearly confused Dan and tells him he's the one who Jung is truly interested in. The God of High School narrator then steps in and tells us that the story is starting to go off course with the sudden appearance of Mori Jung. We then see Yui starting to rumble. Somewhere else, the city's eastern barrier gets all magically fixed up when Executive D arrives and uses his powers on it. All the ruined sections of the barrier are patched up in exchange for D's hair. Afterwards, D reports his recent mission to his boss, Mujin, and gives the world president some great news. According to his findings, D can tell that Daewoo's powers are growing weaker, as evidenced by how sloppily he applied his weak force technique on the eastern barrier. Back at school, V witnesses the aftermath of the rooftop brawl and spots Jung. Something sparks within V when he identifies Jung, thinking to himself that he's the boy he's been looking for. Meanwhile, Jung points to Dan after telling him how interested he is in the boy when he suddenly feels his middle finger get frostbite. That's because Ihan has stepped up thinking Jung is trying to start some static with her brother. But Jung backs down and simply tells them how he's now sure that it was a good idea to attend Apricot Flower High School. Ihan asks him who he really is, and Jung gives a vague answer. Even he isn't sure about that. The school's security then escorts him away. Later, after school, Ihan gives Dan an earful. She thinks Dan is purposefully grabbing the attention of the entire school to capitalize on his newfound popularity after the initial preliminary games. Dan tries to explain himself, but Ahan's too angry to let him slip a word in. In the end, the two get into a quarrel, with Ahan telling her brother to just keep his head down because he's not hot stuff. Dan backs down and apologizes to Ahan. The next day, Dan attends school and business is still booming. However, some of the other students of Apricot High have started to believe Dan is using his side gig as an excuse to train for the God of High School competition. In turn, a few kids start to demand discounts for Dan's services. Later that day, at gym, a couple of random girls, presumably from Peony class, talk about how the kids from Camellia class have gotten it into their heads that they can beat the 4 divine gods if they train hard enough. This stems not only from Dan's superb display at the initial preliminaries, but also from seeing Jung absolutely posterize Bang, Jwawu, and Sunny the day before. Things get heated when a couple of Peony class kids start badmouthing Jung. The Camellia class kids overhear this and start a fight with the 2 Peony class jerks, but the Camellia boys get trounced in the process. Meanwhile, Dan visits Peony class only to find out that Ahan has already left for training. Her classmates tell Dan that she told them to tell him Ahan will take her meds. While this is happening, Ahan hits the bags and puts the work in. She remembers the previous conversation she had with V where Ahan was able to correctly surmise that the executive had been tampering with the preliminary tournament rules. Ahan's not too happy about this, since she knows Bang deserves the win from the initial contest. She even goes so far as to threaten V that she'll report his shady activities to the God of High School tournament's organizers. But V doesn't care. That's because we soon find out that the order for a redo of the preliminary tournament comes from a powerful source, Mujin. In fact, V has a formal letter confirming this, which he shows to Apricot Flower High's principal. In any case, V tells the principal to keep this a secret, and the man agrees. Now, Apricot Flower High School has been experiencing some turmoil ever since Dan's performance at the initial preliminaries and Jung's fight against 3 of the divine gods. Specifically, the student body have started going on protest demanding they participate in the upcoming preliminary contest redo too. The principal of the school brings this up with V, who tells him that he has a plan to bring order back to Apricot Flower High. Later that night, Ahan comes home late from training again. On the other hand, Dan gets flashbacks of Jung's martial arts which made his heart beat fast and hands shake. The following day, we get to see V's plan come to fruition when he leaves a red envelope for each and every Apricot Flower High School student. This envelope contains a participation ticket to the preliminaries, which means that V has just opened the floodgates for anyone at Apricot Flower High to show their chops at the preliminary contest redo. That same day, V receives a call presumably from Mujin, who asks him about the preparations for the upcoming preliminaries. V reassures the person on the other line that everything's going smoothly and that he's found a couple of powerful candidates at Apricot Flower High School. Somewhere else, Daewoo rushes to the correct rendezvous point when a bunch of world government agents block his path. These agents are called Executive Team, Latin, and they're made up of 7 members, each named after a Roman numeral. The long and short of it is that Executive Team Latin does a lot of posturing when they meet Daewoo. After all, Daewoo has become a living legend at this point. They then try to start a scuffle with the karate master and instantly get each and every one of their butts spanked. We then find out the specific rules of the upcoming preliminary tournament, and it's a doozy. First, this competition is going to be merged with the primary God of High School tournament. Then, this new format calls for a different game. The participants won't be participating in another flag planting competition. Instead, the new preliminary tournament is going to be a pro wrestling style Royal Rumble where participants enter the arena one by one based on the number on their ticket. In addition, any ticket holders automatically eliminated from the competition if they do not enter the arena or do not have their ticket when their number is called on the day of the competition. The winner of the preliminary tournament is going to be determined based on the number of tickets any given participant collects, with the prize being a slot in the primary God of High School tournament. Then there's the final rule of the contest. Everything else is permitted. The principal has his concerns about these new rules, and so do a few members of the student body, who are now protesting these egregious rule changes. But V reassures the principal that all of this is part of his plan to weed out the weaklings of Apricot Flower High. That's because V knows that the 6th rule means the students would start fighting over tickets well before the start of the preliminary tournament. In fact, that's what immediately happens the moment Apricot Flower High School students become aware of these new rules. Remember that meathead transfer student G? Well, he's back to being a dumb bully when he hassles another student to demand their ticket. He even explains that this is super legal, since rule number 6 explicitly states that all other rules are allowed. From there, Apricot Flower High School becomes a war zone, with students forming black markets where they sell higher numbered tickets for a price, while other factions have formed groups and just straight up mug other students for their tickets. This effectively stopped the protests from continuing, since everyone became busy trying to get those dang tickets for themselves. On the other hand, Dan has bigger problems right now. Sure, business had recently been great for him, but we soon find out that Dan hasn't been able to make ends meet after giving his clients large discounts. His financial woes become all the more apparent when he realizes that he needs to come up with this month's rent. Later, Dan goes to his sister and offers to give her his ticket, but Ahan refuses and tells her brother that she's planning on winning the whole thing all by herself. Dan leaves and is understandably hurt that Ahan's been acting cold towards him. Sunny then walks up to Dan and offers to buy his ticket. Without thinking twice, Dan sells the ticket for a couple million won, which is just enough to cover their rent. Somewhere else, Jung walks aimlessly around the city as he passes by a wanted poster featuring Mori Jin's face. We then get a glimpse of his origin story, where we find out that Jung just suddenly woke up one day with no memories of who he is. At that time, the first thing he saw was Yoi, and it made Jung think that the powerful artifact was calling to him. From there, Jung lived as a hobo until he met someone who called him Mori. In the present, Jung stares at Mori's wanted poster and remembers Ahan asking him who he really is. Jung eventually brushes off the thought and continues walking around the neighborhood. All of a sudden, he hears a voice calling him by the name Mori. He turns to see that it's none other than Daewoo, who is relieved to have finally found Jung. But this meeting instantly becomes hostile when Jung greets Daewoo with a high kick. Daewoo blocks it and tells Jung to calm down, while Jung senses that the guy in front of him isn't just some scrub he could defeat without breaking a sweat. Still, Jung continues to barrage Daewoo, and the karate master is forced to defend himself. Somewhere else, Dan has just finished paying the bills at the nearby ATM before heading towards a few other students to continue with his daily grind. Dan spots Ahan walking to the local hospital, which gets him worried for his sister. But Dan chooses to focus on his side gig for now instead. Meanwhile, Daewoo's actually enjoying his tussle with Jung, since it reminds him of the first time he and the original Mori Jin fought all the way back during the first season of God of High School. At this point, Daewoo knows what to expect, so he counters Jung with his patented Fist of the Black Turtle ability when he finds an opening. Jung is forced to leap back, and Daewoo teleports beside the boy that tell him they should talk now. While all this is happening, we get caught up with a few more God of High School staples when we see Jang Mi in court. If you guys didn't know it already, Jang Mi has since started dating Pum Wang after the events of Ragnarok, and the two have established the preeminent human rights law firm in this new world order. Right now, Jang Mi is representing the one and only Park Ilpyo in court, as the Mujin's world government is angling to put him behind bars after branding him as a war criminal during the events of the Great War. Jang Mi presents the case that Ilpyo had no choice but to participate in the Great War due to the fact that his borrowed power, the nine-tailed fox, was a key. The red-headed defense attorney goes on to plead that Ilpyo played a huge part in building the current world order, since his actions ultimately led to the removal of the so-called taboo that led to most of humanity being able to use borrowed power. The judge, who happens to be a borrowed power who possesses the soul of Solomon, asks Ilpio if he agrees with Jangmi's statement, to which our boy says yes. After the hearing, Jangmi scolds Ilpio for being late to his own trial. More interesting is when we find out from Jangmi that Mujin and the world government are also actively trying to convict Beck for imagined crimes this whole time. We then find out that the world government isn't just keeping an eye on Ilpio. It turns out that they've put a power limiter on him that prevents Ilpio from using his borrowed powers. He asks Jangmi if he can take off the pesky trinket, but she emphasizes that Ilpio has no other choice but to roll with it. On top of that, Jangmi warns him to never attempt to even channel the nine-tailed fox while wearing the limiter, as this would instantly give the world government an excuse to arrest him on the spot. From there, Jangmi asks Ilpio how things are going in his territory. Much like everywhere else, Ilpio tells her that things are just getting worse, all thanks to the new laws the world government has established, which favor borrowed power users over those who don't possess the ability. This makes Ilpio wonder if breaking the taboo during Ragnarok was really the right call. But his musings are interrupted when Pum Wang arrives with some bad news. He reveals that the world government is planning on convicting Ilpio unless he cooperates with them. Hearing this, Ilpio remembers what the world government actually wants, for him to join their ranks as a field agent. In fact, Ilpio recalls having a meeting with a member of Executive Team Latin named Latin 4. At the time, 4 tried to convince Ilpio to become a part of Executive Team Latin in exchange for clearing his name and the world government dropping his case. In the present, Ilpio changes the subject and wonders how that kid is adjusting to his new school, possibly referring to Jung. It's also here where we find out that whoever this kid is just happened to appear in front of Ilpio some time ago. The story then moves to Daewee and Jung, who have finally stopped tussling and are hanging out on a rooftop somewhere in the city. Although Jung is relieved that Daewee doesn't have his guard up anymore, he is still wary after sensing the man's powerful dark energy coursing through him. In any case, Jung gets to the point and asks Daewee what he wanted to talk about. In response, Daewee tries to jog the boy's memory by having him remember Mira. We even get a humorous exchange between the two dudes when Daewee tries to remind Jung of Mira's cooking. This piques Jung's interest and he asks Daewee where Mira is right now. It's here we discover that the two lovebirds are having a bit of a quarrel after Daewee mentions that he broke a promise he once made to Mira. More to the point, however, Daewee reveals that his true intention for approaching Jung today is to warn him. As he puts it, Daewee has been looking for Mori this whole time. The problem is, anyone who even resembles Mori always ends up getting taken out by Mujin and the world government. It's also here that Daewee reveals the god of high school tournament's true purpose. The general public only knows it as a competition aimed at giving its contestants a chance at climbing the social ladder or accolades. But the truth of the matter is that Mujin established this tournament with the sole purpose of luring and slaughtering Jaekondasung, or anyone who even has a passing resemblance to the original Mori Jin. Daewee then tells this is the same reason why Jung's life is in danger. He looks almost exactly like Mori. While this is happening, a researcher debriefs Mujin about something called Project Wi-Fi, telling the world president that it's currently 40% complete. They go on to explain that the reason for the slow progress of Project Wi-Fi is due to what they call the access point design phase. They add that they've even tried hiring Bei as per Mujin's recommendation, but the genius inventor turned them down. Mujin receives more bad news when his longtime confidant, Executive P, reports that Executive Team Latin has been completely defeated. On the bright side, she does inform the world president that their agents are currently busy tracking down Daewee. After that, P tells Mujin that V has found a couple of so-called possible candidates in Zone 8, aka Apricot Flower High School's area, and when Mujin learns there's 2 of them, he pulls out all stops and orders his people to station a squad of Jindo dogs in Zone 8 and to prepare the area's Project Wi-Fi capabilities. And just to make sure this issue is properly dealt with, Mujin even tells everyone that he's going to pay Zone 8 and the 2 possible candidates a personal visit. Meanwhile, Dan arrives inside a gym and remembers seeing Jung's fight with Bang. Somewhere else, the tables have turned for Ju and Ji. As the pudgy bully beats Ju in a fight, Ju asks Ji how the heck he suddenly got stronger. Ji then reveals that his hand was already injured when they first confronted each other back during Ji's first day in peony class. It's revealed that Ji suffered this injury after cracking Dan with a few punches prior, proving that Dan's really got an iron jaw and that there really is more to this unassuming kid. Back at the gym, Dan tries to emulate Jung's Taekwondo moves but stops when Yoon arrives to ask him what he's doing. In response, Dan simply tells his friend he's trying to pretend to be Bruce Lee. That evening, Jung sits in his apartment brooding over the things that Daewee told him earlier in the day. A flashback shows Daewee reiterating his warning to Jung to not participate in the God of High School tournament. But we find out that Jung sort of shares the same fighting spirit and gung-ho attitude as the original Mori when he tells Daewee that he's going to join the contest no matter what. As Jung points out, he feels like he'll be able to recover his lost memories in that competition. Daewoo doesn't argue his point and bids Jung farewell. Before leaving though, Jung asks him if there are other borrowed power users as strong as Daewoo out there. Daewoo tells him there are lots of them, but this one guy he knows, referring to the original Mori, can rip all of those power borrowers to pieces with his martial arts moves. Later, a mysterious figure walks up to Daewoo telling him that the latest candidate has taken the bait. More so, the government is expected to make a move. This makes Daewoo ask if quote-unquote this is really the right way, to which the mysterious figure tells him that not doing whatever this is would mean they lose another candidate. While this is happening, Dan shows up at a local hospital to request for his family member's medical records. However, he's shot down when the clerk tells him that the only way for him to see these files is with a bunch of other documents, like a family relations certificate, Dan and the patient's ID card, and a patient consent form. So Dan rushes toward the Civil Affairs building to get the forms he needs, but it still isn't enough for the clerk to show him those medical records he wants to see. Dan gives up in the end and makes the trek back home. Along the way, he and Daewoo pass each other on the streets. Daewoo instantly senses Dan's aura, but the boy disappears in the crowd before he could talk to him. Even more curious is when Daewoo's right eye starts bleeding after passing by Dan. Meanwhile, Jung comes home to his apartment only to see Moojin waiting for him there. Moojin assumes that Jung is actually Mori and wastes no time slamming his face toward the door. The world president continues to try and make Jung confess that he's Mori, but the boy is able to break free from Moojin's grasp for a counterattack. It falls flat though, as Moojin easily subdues Jung with his borrowed power before he could even land a hit on him. With Jung forced to the ground, Moojin realizes that he's just another so-called fake. Still, Moojin tries to insist that Jung is out here trying to get revenge for what he did to Taijin. He even lets it slip how exactly he managed to ultimately become the world president. Specifically, how he used Mori as a pawn and assassinated Taijin during the tail end of the Great War. Moojin continues to taunt and prod at Jung, which allows the boy to muster up his energy and break free from Moojin's technique. He attempts another counterattack, but Jung stops in his tracks yet again when Moojin incapacitates him with a few stakes to the limbs. Again, Moojin continues to troll Jung and prepares to end the boy's life with a stake to the back of the head. Surprisingly, Ji steps in to save Jung before Moojin delivers the killing blow. We then get a big reveal that Daewoo's liaison this whole time was none other than this fat meathead. But that's not the biggest surprise, as we also learn that Ji is actually Xiao Qin in disguise. Moojin retreats and links up with P, who asks him how the candidate was, referring to Jung. Moojin tells her that Xiao Qin is protecting the boy. He realizes that Daewoo has specifically sent one of his most powerful bishops to protect Jung, which makes Moojin come to the conclusion that the world government should also escalate things. So Moojin tells P to change their situation from Jindo Dog to DEFCON and gather 80% of all their troops to this location. Back at the apartment, Xiao Qin tells Jung pretty much the same thing that Daewoo told him earlier, to lay low and not join the God of High School tournament. However, finding out that there are other powerful borrowed power users out there, combined with the whole mess he went through with Moojin, just makes Jung all the more determined to get his revenge against the world president. Somewhere else, Ahan receives some horrible news. A doctor tells her that she's been diagnosed with leukemia, and it's just too heavy for Ahan to process right now. Not long after, the preliminary tournament redo begins, with this day marked as D-Day 0. Back to Ahan's clinic visit, a silver lining appears before our girl when her doctor tells her that leukemia has since been a treatable disease after the events of the Great War. But some things don't change even in this seemingly utopic world order. That is to say, only people flush with cash are able to afford the treatments required for illnesses like this. And as we all know by now, Ahan and Dan aren't exactly a couple of trust fund babies. The good thing is that the doctor also tells Ahan of a new revolutionary treatment for her disease that involves nanomachines. It's not something she could get with money though, as this particular procedure is only available for free to world government executives. In the present, the God of High School tournament starts. As you'd expect, the whole event has tons of fanfare, as if it were a combination of the World Cup and a Taylor Swift concert. Everyone from the contestants to their parents crowd the venue and prepare for the imminent contest. Meanwhile, some random kid outside the venue loses his mom, but a mysterious dude wearing a hood helps him reunite with her. Surprisingly, this same hooded dude also happens to be the babysitter for a child who looks eerily similar to Daewoo. If you guys didn't know it already, this kid belongs to Mira. The hooded man picks up the boy and transforms to his original form, and we find out that he's none other than former Nox Bishop Mandok, who now goes by his other name, Manjin. Manjin looks at the stadium and comments how Moojin is still acting like a clown. While this is happening, a couple of middle-aged God of High School tournament organizers use their power to terraform the arena where the official competition will be held. The announcer of the event then gives a classic exposition dump about the game the participants will be playing, and we already know most of the information here. 1. It's a Royal Rumble-style tournament that God of High School itself admits it cribbed from the WWE. Then there's the rule where the winner is the person who gathers the most number of tickets. And perhaps the only new detail we get here is that the arena has 4 entrances from which the contestants will emerge one by one, according to the number on their ticket. With that out of the way, the announcer declares the first person to enter the Royal Rumble, and it's Ahan. Meanwhile, Dan gets on a cab headed for XX University Hospital, presumably the same hospital Ahan went to earlier. The Royal Rumble begins and Ahan makes quick work of a Camellia class student named Jongwook-do. The two get into a bit of drama before Ahan ices the poor kid, telling Jongwook that he's basically a bandwagoning idiot who's deluded to think he can step up to a divine god after seeing Dan's performance in the preliminaries. In any case, Jongwook becomes a popsicle and Mira braces herself for the next scrub to come and face her. The other contestants line up behind the door, and we find out that the competition sends in new participants to the arena through one of the 4 gates at random. A couple of dudes named Bom Shik-woo and Chung-woo Ja get their turn and enter the playing field. These 2 boys have come up with the plan to join forces and avoid any confrontation. Simply put, they're aiming to wait out the competition and use the tickets they've gathered prior to the start of the contest to win the whole game. All in all, these kids have 30 tickets between them. The announcer catches on to what Woo and Jwa are trying to do. Meanwhile, Bang approaches Ahan in the middle of the arena, and the crowd goes crazy thinking that they'll get a matchup between these 2 divine gods. However, everyone is surprised when Bang and Ahan decide to team up and put hands on the other contestants instead. In the middle of all this, Ahan has a flashback to earlier when Dan tried asking her about her diagnosis. The siblings ended up having another quarrel when Ahan lashed out and pretty much blamed Dan for her bum leg. In the present, all the 4 divine gods have entered the arena, and it appears that they're planning on linking up with one another to take down the next contestant coming to the field, the same guy who humbled 3 of them, Jung. Curiously, something makes Ahan change her mind. Instead of working with her fellow apricot flower high divine gods, our girl tells them to just gang up on her. When Sunny protests, Ahan replies by telling them that she's going to do the same thing that Jung did to them during the rooftop scuffle. We then get a flashback from about a few minutes ago showing the 4 divine gods working together to try and become co-winners of the Royal Rumble. However, both Sunny and Jwawu each have their own shady plans to screw over their classmates. You see, Sunny has hoarded a bunch of tickets with his parents' money even before the start of the tournament. On the other hand, Jwawu is already gathering more and more tickets with the help of his zombies in other parts of the arena. Simply put, only Ahan and Bang are genuinely working towards becoming co-winners of this game. However, we discover that Ahan has decided to end her alliance with the other divine gods when she catches on that Sunny and Jwawu are going to betray them down the line. On top of that, Ahan only knows she has about an hour to win the whole thing due to her illness, with the only thing stopping her from collapsing are a few pills that her doctor prescribed. Bang also agrees to end his partnership with the others and the 4 divine gods go into a melee. Ahan opens up the clash with her ice carnation technique before getting insecure about the gap between her and Jung's powers. But there's no time to be a glum chum, because Ahan knows she needs to catch each of the other 4 divine gods in a one-on-one fight if she wants to come out on top of the scuffle. All of a sudden, Sunny appears and smushes her face. He thinks he's gotten the better of Ahan, but she counters by freezing Sunny's wrist. Sunny follows up with a thunderbolt directed right at Ahan's well-endowed chest and our girl gets electrocuted. However, she's able to quickly recover and redirect Sunny's electricity towards him with the help of her ice powers. This allows Ahan to find an opening and go for a takedown attempt against her opponent. But Jwawu shows how much of a weasel he is when he attacks both Sunny and Ahan while the 2 are busy hitting each other with their respective ice and electricity techniques. This ultimately turns into a 3-way clash between the divine gods. The dust settles and we see that Sunny has been bitten by one of Jwawu's zombies, while a seemingly PTSD-stricken Jwawu has had his left arm completely frozen by Ahan's frosty technique. Jwawu tries to plead with Sunny to work together and take down Ahan, but Sunny demands Jwawu remove the zombie toxins from his body. Jwawu declines this, since he's sure that Ahan was also bitten and it would only take a few more minutes before she succumbs to its effects. If he were to remove the toxin from Sunny, Ahan would also be free from his control and they'd have to deal with her some more. Sunny protests against Jwawu's decision, but their argument goes nowhere when Ahan sneaks up on the 2 and literally stabs them in the back with a pair of icicles. With the 2 out of the way, Bang emerges and steps up to Ahan, ready to pick her off after Sunny and Jwawu did the heavy lifting. Not too far away, Jung goes on a tear through the hordes of random contestants and takes their tickets. He eventually makes his way to Ahan and sees that Bang has just jammed his fist right into her face. No worries though, because Ahan was able to prevent any damage from Bang's strike by literally freezing her face. More importantly, this clash has allowed Ahan to find an opening in Bang's defense, which she capitalized on by freezing his entire midsection. And with a single body shot, Ahan proves that she's the most powerful of the 4 divine gods of Apricot Flower High School. She then turns to Jung and challenges him to a fight. Jung is hesitant to put hands on an already battle-damaged opponent, but Ahan insists. So our girl doesn't say another word and instead blasts Jung with her ice powers. He defends against it with a well-placed Re-Taekwondo Tengyuti sweep before hurling a boulder at her. Somewhere else, Dan reaches the same hospital Ahan went to and learns what's really happening with his sister from the doctor. Dan wastes no time and immediately rushes back to the arena, while Jung does a number on Ahan in the middle of the battlefield. Dan continues to hoof it towards the stadium, all the while remembering his sister and blaming himself for what happened to one of her legs. In the end, Dan continues to tell himself that he'll take full responsibility for whatever might happen to his sister. Back in the arena, Ahan and Jung's clash gets more intense with every exchange. It's almost as if they're on even terms, as they trade blows and attempt to find an opening in each other's defense. The two combatants find themselves in a close-quarter deadlock. Ahan breaks it with a trio of spiky ice rings, but this allows Jung to blow past her defenses. As he puts it, there's one thing that borrowed power users have in common. They all have a slight vulnerability whenever they wind up their abilities. From there, Jung gives Ahan a quick three-piece to the face before punctuating it with a high kick to the neck. Ahan falls down, but Jung ends up reopening the wounds he got from Mujin due to the previous exchange. He's taken aback when Ahan gets back on her feet and prepares for another clash. Meanwhile, our girl is 100% determined to prove herself against Jung. Their next confrontation ends as soon as it begins, with Jung easily driving his knee into Ahan's gut before sending her flying with another high kick. But just like before, Ahan stands up. Again, Jung goes for another blitz that sends Ahan skidding off far into the battlefield. This time though, Ahan has made sure to sneak in a counterattack, as we find out that she was able to trap Jung's leg with her ice before he sent her flying. Meanwhile, Dan continues to run towards the stadium, as he listens to a live broadcast of the match from his phone. Back in the arena, Jung gets ready to finish off Ahan with a powerful blow he simply calls Jin. Ahan braces herself for impact, thinking that this is where her run ends. However, at the last second, our girl was able to pool her reserves and reveal the true extent of her borrowed powers. Jung suddenly feels the ground rise from beneath his feet and crush one of his legs. He turns to see that Ahan isn't just channeling the soul of Lot, one of the princes of Natak, but has actually managed to summon each and every one of those gods. That's right guys, Ahan's borrowed power is made up of Arden, Lot, and Jwala. And just like that, Jung finds himself trapped in fire, ice, and stone. Their final clash culminates with Ahan summoning the full powers of the three princes of Natak. It causes such a powerful explosion that the technique blows off a huge section of the stadium and takes down scores of other random contestants with it. Finally, Dan reaches the stadium only to see that it's become a wreck. An emergency response team makes its way through the crowd while carrying a stretcher, and Dan is absolutely shocked to see his unconscious sister lying on it. At the same time, we find out that Jung has managed to survive Ahan's powerful attack by planting what looks like a large broken piece of his legendary staff, Yoi, into the ground and using it as a barrier. We then get the full lowdown of what exactly happened during Ahan and Jung's climactic clash. It turns out that Ahan literally blew off half of the stadium with her borrowed power, something that even Manjin and Mira's kid sees from the outskirts of the venue. On the other hand, Jung did manage to save himself from the brunt of the blast with an enlarged fragment of what looked like Yoi. That's not where things ended though, as Jung immediately jumped right behind Ahan and took her down with another powerful kick. All of a sudden, Jung found himself dealing with a massive headache, as he began stomping on the back of Ahan's head when she tried getting back up again. This grueling sequence happened long enough to make even Jung feel uncomfortable, with him dealing his splitting headache while driving his foot into Ahan's head. In the middle of all this, Jung keeps urging Ahan to stay down and yield, but there's just no quitting in our girl. She eventually manages to get back on her feet, but she's all too weak to defend against Jung's strikes. They repeatedly clash some more until Ahan just loses all her juice and falls in battle. In the present, Dan stands in front of his unconscious sister as the emergency response team makes their way through the crowd. Dan turns to see that Jung has stolen Ahan's headband, but he chooses to focus on Ahan instead. Things get worse when the emergency response team makes it known that Ahan needs a blood transfusion immediately. This forces Dan to desperately look for a donor among the crowd, even going so far as to offer a monetary reward for whoever gives Ahan the blood she needs. Later, we find out that Ahan fortunately made it to the venue's emergency room and had gotten the transfusion thanks to Dan's efforts. Dan continues to watch over his sister and starts to think that everything that's going on is his punishment for not listening to her. Yoon steps into the room to visit them. More than that, he gives Dan a ticket to the competition, which is numbered at 5203, near the end of the participant count. Yoon reveals that it's not his ticket. Xiao Chen, aka G, gave this ticket to him and told Yoon to hand it over to Dan. Yoon then wishes the siblings well before leaving. At the same time, Dan figures out what he needs to do, so he catches up to Yoon and asks him if he could watch over Ahan for a bit, because right now, Dan is about to join the tournament. Before making his way to the arena, however, Ahan wakes up and whispers something in her brother's ear. We don't really know what she says at this point, but it's enough to make Dan question when she did quote-unquote something. Shortly after, Dan makes it to the arena and joins the Royal Rumble, where he's greeted by a horde of Apricot Flower High School students who had run-ins with Ahan in the past when they tried bullying Dan. Each and every other contestant plans on ganging up on our boy as payback for what Ahan did to their faces. This confrontation climaxes when one of the random students punches Dan in the face, while another talks smack about him and his sister. Basically, the other dudes think that Dan has had a free pass because he had Ahan defending him before. But now that Ahan's out of the picture, they think they're free to put hands on Dan. Well, these random meatheads are about to have a rude awakening, because Dan finally reveals that the reason Ahan had been acting as his bodyguard wasn't because she was protecting him, it's because she was protecting everyone else from what Dan might do to them. Just like that, we see that the same guy who had just smacked broke his hand from the impact. As for the other bully, Dan puts him on spin cycle when our boy delivers a back fist right to the dude's face. It now dawns on the other random participants that they've been messing with the wrong boy, as Dan tells them to just come at him simultaneously, since he doesn't have the time to deal with scrubs like them. While this is happening, the same meathead who broke his hand after punching Dan earlier comes to the realization that hitting Dan is like hitting a solid piece of rock. With his challenge issued out, the rest of the contestants not so much charge Dan all at once, then get to their hiding spots to ambush our boy. It doesn't matter though, because Dan just patiently makes his way towards Jung's location. Withstanding the various ambushes, the other participants attempt to spring along the path. The random kids do their best to stop Dan in his tracks, but nothing works. In fact, some of them straight up grab makeshift weapons like clubs and start walloping Dan, and all they get for their efforts is a swift beating from our boy. To their credit, the random contestants manage to mobilize and form a coherent unit to try and swarm Dan. They grab their sticks and start thwacking on him like a piñata. On the other hand, this whole exchange awakens something in Dan. By simply observing his opponent's movements, Dan is able to effortlessly take them down one by one with pure martial arts alone. He first knocks out 5 people from the opposing ranks, but the gang just continues to swarm him. However, it's also at this point that we see Dan seemingly possess the same copy ability that the original Mori Jin has displayed throughout the course of the series. This happens when one of the random attackers tries to bull rush him, which causes Dan to remember Jung's cracking elbow strike on Bang. In turn, Dan performs the same move on his attacker, and he elbows the dude's body so hard that his shirt rips off. Still, the horde of random contestants won't let up. They blitz Dan once again. By now, Dan has defeated 12 other participants. We even get to see him perform the same kick Jung used on Bang, as our boy breaks one of his enemy's knees with a precision patella strike. This makes the same idiot he just elbowed realize the truth, that it's true Dan lacks experience in martial arts, but he's just using scrubs like them right now as fighting practice. On the other hand, Dan knows he has a long way to go to reach Jung's level. Once more, the other contestants swarm our boy, and the same moron he just elbowed earlier gets a second wind after picking up a stray club from the ground. None of this matters though, because Dan eliminates each and every one of them from competition with a single strike that sends them all flying. Those who are left standing can only run the opposite direction, knowing that Dan has become an absolute threat. So much so that the announcer declares that Dan is gradually inching towards Jung's spot in the competition. That's because Dan is now in second place. This whole display hypes up the crowd, especially Dan's classmates from Camellia class, who start cheering him on as he makes his way towards Jung. With all the distractions taken care of, Dan finally reaches Jung's spot in the arena, where he's currently sitting on top of his Yoi fragment. Jung greets Dan and tells him he knew that he was the strongest guy at Apricot Flower High this whole time. Dan takes a moment to remind himself of how Jung wrecked Ahan earlier before formally challenging him to a tussle. Back at the stadium's emergency room, Ahan senses what's going on in the arena and desperately pleads for Dan to not fight Jung. Back in the arena, Dan tells Jung he knows he really doesn't have any beef with Ahan, but he demands Jung to give back his sister's headband. Jung acts like a boy and says, "Or what?" This triggers something in Dan, so he tells Jung to come down from his perch and fight him, going so far as to call him an a-hole. Well, Jung obliges, and the two warriors waste no time to begin their duel. Dan opens up with a right straight, but Jung's experience in fisticuffs shines through when he easily parries it before countering with a strike that sends Dan flying. Jung starts talking trash at her boy, but does commend him for having a rock-hard physique that can withstand a beating. Things have happened so fast that even the audience doesn't know what exactly Jung did to Dan in their previous exchange. Perhaps the announcer says it best. Jung seems to have gotten even faster now that he's dropped the weight of the stone pillar. Meanwhile, Dan puts down his trusty rucksack and steps up to Jung once more. Jung's gotten so confident at this point that he starts toying with our boy, telling him where he's going to hit Dan before he lands his strikes. Still, Jung is able to back his trash talk when Dan fails to block or parry each of Jung's telegraph strikes. Jung ups the ante, and Dan nearly folds under the speed of his opponent's hands. This clash culminates with Jung finding an opening and hitting Dan with a super clean liver shot that nearly shuts down our boy. Dan can only recoil, as Jung barrages him with a series of powerful punches. However, Jung fails to notice that Dan has been inching himself closer with every strike he delivers. Dan's already right in front of him by the time Jung realizes what his opponent's doing. However, Jung is not one to get thrown off his game. He lands a high kick on Dan's neck before the boy can do anything with the opening he created. But then, double bluff. It turns out Dan did what he just did so he could steal back Ahan's headband from Jung. Still, Jung's assault is enough to open up a huge cut on Dan's body. All the while, the tournament's organizers, particularly the principal and vice principal of Apricot Flower High School, do their best to keep the arena intact. Things get so heated between Dan and Jung that the MC even tells the other contestants to steer clear of the two warriors. Meanwhile, the emergency teams at the stadium's triage get all the more worried that this turn of events will leave them short-handed. The rest of the staff try to contact V, but no one's answering his phone. In fact, we see some blood next to his phone on the floor. Back in the arena, Jung barrages Dan with more strikes. And again, he fails to notice that our boy has just been leading him to his preferred spot on the battlefield. Particularly, Dan's defense-heavy strategy has allowed him to pin Jung's back right on the Yui fragment. With Jung cornered, Dan goes for a left straight, but he only seemingly hits the large pillar when Jung counters with a punch to Dan's face. Jung capitalizes on the opportunity and starts another barrage. However, Dan is able to recover and go for a takedown attempt against his opponent, slamming Jung back on the solid stone pillar. Dan then winds up a kick and again hits the Yui fragment when Jung dodges. In turn, Jung tries to reverse their positions by grabbing Dan by the shirt to cock up an overhead throw. However, Jung miscalculates his own strength and ends up ripping Dan's shirt off his ripped body instead of properly using it as a grip for his throw. So Dan finds himself in a prime position to end their bout, with Jung's back turned away from him. Dan goes for another right straight, but Jung's not giving up. He counters with a knee to Dan's face and gets ready for follow-up strikes right after. Dan, on the other hand, hits the Yui pillar once again. But it's at this moment that Jung finally catches on to what Dan has been doing this whole time. That's because Dan's latest punch was enough to tip over the Yui fragment and make it topple over. This causes a huge earthquake in the stadium that leaves even more of its parts wrecked. Meanwhile, Dan gets back on his feet and grabs Jung, telling him that he has to win this contest no matter what. Just outside the arena, people wonder if Dan and Jung have knocked each other out. That's not the case though, because the two continue to tussle in the middle of the arena, with Jung attempting to break Dan's arm with a devastating 12-6 elbow. Jung starts to get frustrated at this point, considering that Dan just keeps on getting up in spite of taking so much damage. Like earlier, Dan eats up a bunch of Jung's hits to find an opening and go for another takedown attempt. However, Jung prevents his opponent from getting top position when he commands his Yui fragment to expand. Another tremor occurs in the stadium, which causes a landslide in the middle of the arena. The dust settles after a few moments and Jung wonders if he's won their bout. However, he immediately gets his answer when he feels Dan tugging on his sleeve again. Jung gets even more frustrated and mercilessly brings the beatdown on Dan, all the while berating our boy for being too slow and too weak to keep up with him. Jung goes on to say that the only thing going for Dan is his rock-solid body, but besides that, he trumps his opponent in every category. Jung's determined to end things between them during this clash, as he targets specific weak points in Dan. First, he cracks Dan with a powerful kick to the abdomen before going after his left femur. Dan, on the other hand, can only see his entire life and relationship with Ahan flash before his very eyes while Jung gives him the business. By the time Dan realizes it, he's already broken several ribs and cheekbone. But our boy remains lucid as he continues thinking about his sister. Eventually, Jung sets up his final strike, a blow to Dan's head. In response, Dan grabs his rucksack and uses it to block his opponent's devastating attack. All his stuff, from the money he earned from his errand boy gig to Ahan's meds, go flying upon impact. Jung comes to the realization that Dan's not quitting because he wants to protect his sister, but he reaffirms that he's going to defeat him no matter what. Jung even throws some shade and tells Dan that protecting others is beyond him, considering he's one weak dude. However, things take a dramatic turn when everyone from Jung to other now eliminated participants like Bang notice Dan pressing his ear. We then get a flashback from not too long ago, when Ahan whispered something to Dan's ears. It turns out Ahan gave her brother a warning, to not use his true power for fear that everyone will find out who he really is. On top of that, this flashback shows Ahan hinting at Dan's connection to the original Mori when she tells her brother that he's a wanted criminal. In the present, Dan finally comes to terms with the fact that Ahan has been protecting him this whole time. regardless of the spats they've had in the past. Well, the next thing that happens in the middle of the arena gives us more clues about who Dan really is, as he summons an all too familiar staff that used to belong to the Monkey King. And this one is so huge that it makes Jung's own Yoi fragment look like a Vienna sausage. When the dust settles, Dan's form changes to reveal that he now has black hair and a do that eerily resembles the original Mori's hairstyle. And if that's not enough of a giveaway, Dan's pupils have formed that distinct cross-shaped pattern too. Jung asks Dan who he really is, but our boy just throws the question back at him. Realizing that talking is just a waste of time here, Jung chooses to analyze Dan and finds out that the previous injuries he gave him are still there in spite of Dan's transformation. So with that, Jung decides to just find out Dan's true identity after he beats him. He cocks up a classic Re3 stage Hui choke combo, but is shocked when Dan easily checks each and every one of his kicks with a single leg. For the first time, Dan manages to get some offense going when he counters Jung's combo with a vertical kick that sends him skidding through the arena. Jung then has a flashback where we find out that the hooded guy who approached him in the past was none other than Ilpio. At the time, Ilpio told him to summon his true powers in order to get his true memories back. In the present, Jung recovers from the hit and rushes toward Dan, grabbing his opponent's face and sending him away with a powerful punch. Dan instantly recovers his footing and the two combatants meet in the middle of the arena again. Jung and Dan trade blows and are now evenly matched, with their clash culminating in a double blow to each other's face. It doesn't end here though, as these two kids continue to go at it at close quarters until they're both sent flying from each other's strikes. This whole show makes the audience wonder if martial arts alone can really be this powerful. Somewhere else, Daewoo and Ilpio have a conversation over the phone where Daewoo asks his old friend how he knows Jung. Ilpio tells Daewoo that Jung just appeared in front of him in the past wearing nothing but rags and having none of his old memories. More interesting is that Jung asked Ilpio to teach him the ways of Re technique when they met. Daewoo listens to this and drops the call after telling Ilpio that he just wanted to confirm something. Right now, Daewoo is in the middle of the city causing a traffic jam on the freeway. Mugen's agents catch wind of this and report Daewoo's location. In response, Mugen tells all of his world government agents to prepare for battle immediately. While this is happening, Jung and Dan continue their duel. This time, Jung chooses to go for long-range attacks by kicking over boulders towards Dan. Dan defends against the hail of rocks coming his way. We then get a flashback showing who appears to be the original Mori Jin hurtling through the sky in his Monkey King form, all the while swearing vengeance against Mugen for what he did to his grandpa, Taijin. In the present, Jung comes to the conclusion that it really doesn't matter who he really is, because whoever wins this duel would be dubbed as the real one anyway. God of High School then moves the clock backward to 10 minutes ago to give us an answer why V hasn't been picking up his phone. It turns out that the executive is currently dealing with a problem of his own, as he finds himself in a deadlock duel against Xiao Chen. V's just as surprised as anyone else that G is actually Xiao Chen, but he doesn't back down from their scuffle. He summons his borrowed power, Sharon, and rejoices about the fact that he's able to locate both Gioconda Sung and Nox Bishop in one day. The warriors continue to yammer on instead of throwing hands, with Xiao Chen then asking V why Mugen didn't take out Daewoo all those years ago. The story then switches its focus to Mugen, who is now currently face to face with Daewoo in the middle of the city. We also get an answer to Xiao Chen's question, as the world president reveals that he didn't eliminate Daewoo in the past, since he only kills devils like Mori Jin, and since Daewoo is human, he's safe from Mugen's hit list. Mugen offers Daewoo to join him so that they could rule the world together, but Daewoo's not here for a job offer, he's here for some smoke. Daewoo calls Mugen on his crap and tells him he knows why he didn't take him out in the aftermath of the Great War, because Xiao Chen was there guarding Daewoo while he was unconscious. Daewoo goes on to pretty much call Mugen a filthy poser when he tells him how many humans he's taken out of his way to becoming the world president. People like Taijin, Jason Jon, and Bongchim Na. Daewoo has a flashback within this flashback too, where we see him meet with Xiao Chen not too long ago. At the time, Xiao Chen told her boss that he only needed to give the order and Daewoo's faction would go to war for him. But Daewoo decided to hold off from sparking an all-out war against Mugen for fear that thousands of civilian lives would be put in danger. Back to Xiao Chen, she questionably tells V their plan, which involves grabbing the Gioconda Sung candidate before Mugen could destroy them. This was all a ruse to lure out Mugen from his stronghold. Daewoo tells the world president the same thing, and Mugen's not even angry. In fact, he's impressed that Daewoo now knows how to do what needs to be done in order to achieve your goals. That is to say, Mugen commends Daewoo for using the Gioconda Sung candidate as bait to get him out of his hidey hole. Mugen has a hearty laugh and tells Daewoo he's now worthy to be his rival. In response, the so-called Sage of the East declares he's going to beat the crap out of Mugen. The two combatants step up to each other, but they're distracted when they spot Dan's summon Yoi pop up from the distance. Mugen recognizes the magical staff and remarks how the Yoi they're seeing now is different than the ones before. He then turns towards Daewoo and reveals he's had some work done these past 17 years. This upgrade is actually Project Wi-Fi, an initiative that Mugen calls a field that not even God or the devil dare touch, aka science. Project Wi-Fi is actually the cybernetic enhancement that Mugen has seemingly grafted to his right arm, which allows him to summon what looks like a horde of fountain nibs behind him. It might not seem like much, but Mugen swears by this invention. As a matter of fact, he even says that this weapon was the same one that was used to intercept and slay both the Divine Emperor and Satan himself. Back in the arena, Dan and Jung continue to have their epic martial arts showdown. The two are still evenly matched, but they can feel the damage in their bodies building up from this long, grueling duel. Eventually, Dan manages to sneak in a powerful left straight that rocks Jung before hitting him with a solid kick to the neck. The MC of the competition remarks that Dan has finally taken the momentum away from his opponent in this match, as Dan continues to barrage Jung with more kicks. Even the audience realizes that Dan has got this contest in the bag now, while all Jung can do is have yet another flashback. This time, he remembers seeing the gigantic Yoi monument sticking out from the middle of the ocean. His recollection is interrupted when Dan hits him with the same kind of orang elbow strike he used on Bang during the rooftop confrontation. The two parry each other's legs after that, as Jung notices that Dan has been copying his moves. It's too late to do anything about it though, because Dan unleashes a technique called Homegyory a split second after that. This powerful move is made up of a trio of precision kicks aimed at Jung's pressure points, like his ear, temple, and cervix. Jung gets so much wind knocked out of him that he starts having flashbacks of Mugen calling him a fake. Jung's life flashes before his eyes right after that, from being a drifter when he first appeared in the city to the time he first met Opio. In the present, Jung's Yui magically cracks and crumbles before its essence is absorbed by the other. Dan's much larger staff remains erect and even goes harder after siphoning off its copy. Witnessing this finally makes Jung accept the fact that he's a fake one and Dan is the original. Now we hope you're ready for some much-awaited payoffs for what God of High School has been setting up since the start of this arc, because we're about to get it now. First, we get the same flashback from earlier in the story where we see the original Mori Jin in his Monkey King form falling down to Earth like a meteor. This comes right at the heels of Taijin's death at the hands of Mugen, so Mori is absolutely livid. He screams and yells that he's going to get revenge against Mugen and ultimately crashes in the middle of the city. The thing is, Mori landed right on top of Ahan's house, which instantly took out her parents. If you're still not getting it, it's safe to say that Dan, or Mori, isn't really Ahan's biological sibling. What's more is that we also get some clarification about how exactly Ahan grew up with a bum leg. We find out that although the 2-year-old Ahan survived Mori crashing into their home, stray shrapnel from the house's rubble landed right on her right leg, which permanently deformed it. In the meantime though, Mori is so blinded with rage that he doesn't pay the poor baby any attention and instead desperately tries to form a contract to allow him to get his hands on Mugen. However, this doesn't work, because Mugen had already activated the Holy Grail by the time this happens. Back to the present, Dan blitzes Jung with more kicks to finish their duel. Jung realizes he's gotten too cocky thinking that he's the real Mori Jin this whole time, and all it took was a solid beating from Dan. But don't count Jung out just yet. He ultimately tells himself that he really doesn't care which one between them is real at this point. So Jung gains some distance from Dan and touches his temple, activating his classic Jaebong Chim ×8 buff to even the playing field. Dan sees this and attempts to perform Jaebong Chim on himself too, but it doesn't work. Dan recalls the reason behind this, that his body had already been so damaged from his battle with Satan that he now can't activate the technique. This leaves Dan open for Jung's counterattack. Jung goes for a flying knee, but Dan dodges and tries to hit his opponent with a roundhouse kick. Again, the two combatants find themselves evenly matched, as they each parry the other's attacks. Jung eventually gets the upper hand when he catches Dan with a solid punch to the face before a lightning-fast barrage of strikes left the audience wondering what just happened. Jung then lashes out, thinking that Dan has been mocking him this whole time. In turn, Dan recalls his true memories, particularly the ones from his youth when Taijin took care of him. Dan even goes so far as to say that he thanks Jung for helping him regain these lost memories. And it's here we get confirmation that Dan is not really who he first seemed to be. It's revealed that he is in fact the original Mori Jin, so we're going to call him by his real name from this point on. In the middle of the arena, Mori admits how much he envies Jung for accepting reality instead of hiding his true identity the way Mori did when he took over the Dan persona. The two warriors get all hyped and all the more resolute to fight for what they believe in. The audience is stunned when they see Jung seemingly take out Mori with a kick to his left forearm. But as if by instinct, Mori counters with a precision high kick to Jung's chin. Mori then remembers the first time he met Ahan, back when she was still a baby. He found out that Ahan's parents were a couple of scumbags, and at that time, Mori was more than ready to self-destruct and take everyone out along with him as revenge for Mugen's betrayal. However, he ultimately didn't go through with his plan when baby Ahan grabbed him by the pant leg. This made Mori feel super guilty that he crippled a kid because of his outburst. In the end, Mori took pity on Ahan and decided to take care of her. Seeing Ahan calms Mori down and he transforms himself into a kid just a bit older than Ahan, which then effectively gave birth to the Mori-Dan identity. All the while, Mori recalls Taijin's words of wisdom, to not hate humans too much in spite of how scummy they can get. Somewhere else, even Yoon now knows about Dan's real identity, while Ahan cries in her hospital bed fearing for the worst. In the middle of the arena, Jung still hasn't processed what Mori just hit him with. Soon enough, we all discover that Jung has just been struck with one of Mori's signature finishers called Renewal Recoilless Kick. This issue ends with a flashback showing the aftermath of Mori's transformation into Dan all those years ago. Emergency workers eventually dug through the rubble left from the crash to find Mori, who was now going by the Dan identity, and Ahan trapped underneath. The emergency response team asks him if they're alright, and it's here that Mori first introduces Ahan to be his sister. The rest, as they say, is history. Now back to the present. But just a few moments before Mori landed that devastating recoilless kick on Jung's face, we learned that the Monkey King has used all his battle injuries to his advantage. Specifically, Mori's senses have become sharper and clearer after eating up Jung's previous salvo. Thanks to this, Mori is able to see that although Jung is a powerful opponent, the boy still has much to learn when it comes to the economy of movement and martial arts. Simply put, Jung makes too many inefficient moves whenever he tries to pull off an attack. All of this allows Mori to impeccably time his recoilless kick. In the end, Mori's technique lands square on Jung's chin, and it shuts down his brain. Jung can only stretch out his hand and attempt to reach for Yoi before passing out. With Dan the last man standing, the tournament announcer declares him the winner of the Royal Rumble, as fans rush to the middle of the arena to celebrate the new champ. Meanwhile, Mori transforms back to his Dan form, while everyone from the Camellia class and even the Peony class tearfully cheered not just for Mori's victory, but for the hardcore display of martial arts mastery they just witnessed from the two contenders. Afterwards, Mori checks on Jung to discover that his vitals are still good. More interestingly, Mori notes that Jung isn't really his clone, nor is he related to Mori Huey, his other earlier clone, in any way. Mori speculates about Jung's true identity, but we don't get an answer just yet, as we find out that there are people in the audience who aren't thrilled that Mori Jin has appeared in the middle of the arena. Because remember guys, this new world order has branded Mori, Taijin, and their friends as war criminals. The random audience members try to call the authorities to the scene, especially V, but they all freeze when they see the clouds above them swirling. Somewhere else, we see V has gotten the better of Xiao Chen when he impales the bishop with his black wings. V thinks he's won and begins torturing Xiao Chen, cutting her up and repeatedly stabbing her with his Sharon powers. However, V's showboating is cut short when Xiao Chen stops pretending and reveals that she's just absolutely tickled by everything V's been throwing at her. Xiao Chen then starts giving her enemy a lecture after a brief recap of how Ultio played a hand in removing the taboo. As Xiao Chen puts it, there are two kinds of borrowed power users in this day and age. The post-war generation, which appeared after Ragnarok and the removal of the taboo, and the OG pre-war borrowed power users like Xiao Chen herself. Now Xiao Chen might be out of line here, but she's definitely spitting truth when she tells V that post-war borrowed power users have one thing in common. They all think they're super strong. Here's the thing though, Xiao Chen knows that even the strongest post-war power borrowers don't have the juice to even stand up to a Nox Priest level pre-war power borrower. V gets tired of Xiao Chen's truth bombs, so he promptly rips her apart with his black wings. The executive starts to believe everything is going his way, considering he just beat a bishop like Xiao Chen and revealed the original Jaconda song. But V's about to get another surprise when Xiao Chen re-emerges from her G form with the help of her borrowed power called Baboon. V can only watch as Xiao Chen goes on this whole Sailor Moon-inspired transformation, which ultimately reveals her true form, a hot 40-year-old lady wearing schoolgirl clothes. V shows how much of an uncultured pig he is when he starts berating Xiao Chen for wearing such an attire at that age. He tries to barrage Xiao Chen with his wings, but the pre-war bishop effortlessly bobs and weaves her way towards her enemy. Ultimately, Xiao Chen's fist lands right in front of V's face, while V has one of his wings pointed less than an inch away from Xiao Chen's eye. Make no mistake, this is not a deadlock. In truth, V is forced to stop mid-stab because Xiao Chen has just unleashed a new technique she's learned, the Fist of the Black Turtle. It turns out that she's been training under Daewee this whole time, and she didn't even need to land her punch on V's face to put him to sleep and rip off all his clothes in the process. Back at the stadium, Mori notices that the swirling clouds are actually his legendary weapon, Gunduun. Mori tries to call on Gunduun to prevent it from raining lightning bolts all over the immediate vicinity, but it doesn't work, as Mori realizes that Gunduun has already perceived Jung as its master. Gunduun charges up energy and proceeds to unleash scores upon scores of lightning bolts toward the stadium. All Mori can do is watch as they rain down. Thankfully, powerful kinetic energy envelops the skies above the arena before the bolts hit. Mori turns to see that Daewoo has arrived and just used one of his force abilities to protect everyone from the storm. Even better, Daewoo is aware that Mori has finally regained his memories, and the two best friends have a tearful reunion. In the meantime, world government agents are starting to swarm what remains of the God of High School Tournament Stadium. A couple of random dudes give us a mercifully brief exposition of who Daewoo is, namely that he's part of the Six. What's more of note, however, is that the Six aren't just a collection of powerful warriors in this new world order. Now, each member of this illustrious group has become so powerful that most of them are able to establish independent states on their own. On top of that, Daewoo is regarded as the most powerful member of the Six right now, a person who's as close to a special human cultural asset the world can get. With that out of the way, Mori continues to have his reunion with Daewoo. The Monkey King's memories flood all over him, especially the parts where he failed to protect his friends and family in the past. This causes Mori to bawl his eyes out and apologize to his best friend. In reply, Daewoo tells Mori that he's just happy to be fortunate enough to find Mori after 17 years. He makes a point too, because Daewoo tells him that he would have looked for Mori whether it took half a century or more. Daewoo then gives Mori some classic AA advice, telling his best friend that he should accept the things he can't change. After all, Mori did everything he could to help his friends and family. All the while, the world government's drones and security cameras all around the God of High School Tournament arena either go offline or are destroyed. This is all thanks to Daewoo's right-hand woman, Xiao Chen, who has now successfully infiltrated their enemy's base. Back at the stadium, Daewoo carries Jung's unconscious body and gives us the big revelation about this boy's origins. We find out that Jung is actually a clone created from the DNA sample that Dr. Doogie stole all those years ago. Even more, it turns out that Manjin was able to acquire this sample and fuse it with Dante's DNA, heavily hinting that Jung is a combination between Mori and Okwang, the former king of Nox and the original Jade Emperor. At that moment, Manjin makes his presence known to Daewoo and demands that he return Jung to him. Daewoo answers by hurling a large piece of rock at Manjin, who defends against it with his sword. Daewoo commends Manjin for being able to protect himself, as he uses his compression abilities to concentrate a small chunk of dirt right in front of his face. Manjin knows there's no way he can survive Daewoo's next salvo, so he braces himself for impact. Daewoo launches his compressed dirt to take out Manjin, but the former Nox bishop is lucky enough that it doesn't hit him. That's because his boss, the White Witch of the West, aka Mira Yu, has just appeared on the battlefield to deflect Daewoo's projectile with her sword. Daewoo rants about how Mira's been ghosting him this whole time only to show herself uninvited here. On the other hand, Mira gets sneaky and uses her sword to seemingly cleave Daewoo right on his shoulder. But it's just a fake out, as we soon find out that Daewoo is able to teleport right behind Mira and playfully poke her on the cheek. You can even say that Daewoo is actively not trying to fight his ex, but Mira has other ideas. After basically telling Mira how much he missed her, Daewoo suddenly feels a cut on his neck followed by another one on his left ear. He instantly catches on and blocks Mira's third slash with his bare hands. Daewoo now realizes that Mira's not here to play around with him. Each and every attack she unleashes is a real one meant to take him down. So Daewoo is forced to use his powers to defend against Mira, while Mori recognizes his other best friend a short distance away. Meanwhile, Daewoo puts down Jung so he can focus on tussling with his ex. Manjin takes advantage of this opportunity and grabs Jung, which forces Daewoo to split his attention between using his weak force technique to stop Manjin and defending himself from Mira's sword strikes. Things get worse for Daewoo when more of Mira's underlings appear around Manjin. On the other hand, Mori steps in to stop her from slashing Daewoo with his back turned. Daewoo notices how Mori was able to utilize Mira's weak point to stop her, which just gives further credence that his boy Mori is truly back to his old self. Mori tries to jog Mira's memory, but remember, the Mira we're seeing now is a far cry from the girl from 17 years ago. So Mira lashes out at Mori on instinct when she senses Mori as the Monkey King. Mira tries to attack Mori, but Manjin appears behind her and tells her to stop. After all, their primary mission right now is to retrieve Jung and not get into a tussle with the Monkey King and the Sage of the East. The other Neo-Nox members take Jung's body away, while Daewoo notices how each of this cult's members seem to be getting farther away from their humanity every time they meet. It's revealed that these Neo-Nox soldiers aren't just regular borrowed power users either. Manjin calls them the Tam Squad, hinting that they were created using Ultio's DNA in the past. Neo-Nox and Manjin start to surround Daewoo, but the Sage of the East reveals he's accounted for this. He calls on his reinforcements from his own organization, the original Nox, led by Xiao Chen. It turns out that Daewoo and Nox have been inside the city this whole time, as he planted members of his group in the God of High School Tournament's audience. What's more is that these Nox members aren't your typical priest-level borrowed power users anymore. Instead, we find out that Daewoo has reorganized this once shady cult to become students of the fine art of Kyokushin Karate. In fact, the squad of reinforcements that have just arrived on the battlefield is called the Jade Emperor Special Kyokushin Karate Squad No. 1. Xiao Chen waits for Daewoo to give the order to strike, but a skirmish doesn't happen when Mira's kid suddenly appears and gives his mom a hug. Xiao Chen, on the other hand, is not above scaring a kid, especially considering it's the child of their enemy. In the end, Manjin tells Mori that Gundun has undoubtedly latched itself to Jung, which proves just how the original Monkey King has grown weak. The former Nox Bishop then toys with Mori, teasing him about how he's not the same warrior he used to be. In reply, Mori tells Manjin that even though he's not sure how much of his original powers remain in his body, what he knows is that he's going to put hands on him for trying to mess with Jung's life. Any beatdown we were hoping for up to this point is dashed when Mira, Manjin, and the rest of Neo-Nox retreat. Daewoo's Nox forces also stand down. And in the aftermath, Daewoo tells Mori why he and Mira pretty much broke up after the events of the Great War. This all stems from the illogical promise Daewoo made to Mira back then, the one where he vowed he quote-unquote wouldn't die even if it killed him. In the present, Daewoo admits that he failed to keep that promise, and Mori tells him he saw everything that happened then with one of Ilpyo's fox beads. Daewoo then proceeds to savor the moment of being reunited with his best friend, noting how much they've changed. But their conversation is cut short when Mori intervenes and informs Daewoo that he can't work with him now. God of High School's next issue gives us a more fleshed out view of the world's status quo, and though it doesn't necessarily provide any new information, it's nice that we get a refresher on what's been going on with Mira these past 17 years. If you guys didn't know it already, Daewoo did die during the events of Ragnarok. Mira did too. Well, sort of. The long and short of it is that these two lovebirds were able to ultimately survive the Great War when Okwang's essence split in two. Half of it, Okwang's physical form known as the King's body, went to Mira. The other half, Okwang's more intangible parts, aka the King's mind, transferred to Daewoo. All in all, Altio mentioned back then that Mira inheriting the King's body caused her mind to slip, which turned her into more or less an amnesiac. From then on, Manjin sank his claws into Mira, installing her as the leader of Neo-Nox while supposedly serving as her loyal confidant. In the present, Daewoo tells all of this to Mori, adding that he only had 3 goals in the 17 years since they last saw each other. First, he was looking for Mori, which he's accomplished now. Second, Daewoo wants to make Mujin pay for all the crap he's done. And third, he wants to get back with Mira. Daewoo expresses his intent to focus on dealing with Mujin before getting Mira back. Meanwhile, Mori gets all glum and likens himself to his Yoi, which he has just transformed into a small and shabby little thing the size of a toothpick. He then apologizes to his best friend and tells him he won't be able to help Daewoo with his Mujin problem. This stems from the fact that Mori needs Mujin in the God of High School tournament to get Ahan the nanomachine treatment she needs for her leukemia. Afterwards, we get another good old-fashioned exposition dump about the God of High School tournament and the nano treatment. We've heard this before, but it seems creator Youngjae Park decided to pull stuff out of thin air once again. That's because it now states that those selected to participate in the God of High School tournament are granted rights to become an executive and the nanomachine treatment. If you remember, guys, the story stated that you had to reach the main God of High School tournament's quarterfinals to become an executive and get that sweet nano treatment. In any case, the narrator goes on this long-winded advertisement about the nanomachine, and it's basically a MacGuffin that can cure any disease. Oh, and it seems Mujin was the one who spearheaded this procedure's development. Back to our characters, we find out from Mori that he's formally been given notice that he'll be participating in the upcoming God of High School finals. There's a rule that states all of the tournament finalists must stay in the competition dormitory provided by the organizers of the event for anywhere between 6 months and a year. Mori doesn't argue with any of these, but he chooses to spend his time watching over Ahan before heading over to the dorms. Mori monologues about how he always felt different and asks his sister when exactly she found out that they weren't biological siblings and that he's the real Mori Jin. Ahan tells him she discovered this secret when she regained her memories of that fateful night when Mori crashed into her and her parents' home. This happened back when they were still kids, at the time when Ahan saw an old family portrait without Mori in it. Ahan's still understandably cranky about everything that's happened and tells her brother that she wants to be alone. Mori leaves Ahan's headband and tells her he's going to be gone for a while because of the God of High School final tournament. Their conversation is cut short when the grandpa from the next bed over starts scolding Mori for making such a racket. Mori exits the room and soon has a meeting with Ahan's doctor, who promises him that they'll take good care of her while he's away. Later, Mori receives a notification from his phone telling him that he won some prize money from the preliminaries, a whopping $500,000. Of course, Mori gets all excited from this, but his excitement soon turns to disappointment when he gets a first-hand experience of the price of healthcare in this new world order. Seriously, for a near-utopic society, God of High School's healthcare system leaves so much to be desired. That's because Mori immediately finds out that his $500,000 prize money is just barely enough to cover Ahan's medical bills. Still, Mori pays it and hands over his winnings to the hospital. Later, at their apartment, Mori decides to rummage through Ahan's old journals and gets more evidence that his sister had been protecting him from revealing his true identity this whole time. Plus, she writes in her journal that the reason she was so scared of Dan regaining his memories stems from her fear of Mori forgetting who she is. Back at the hospital, Ahan walks along the hallways. A nurse tells her they're transferring her to another room tomorrow, to which Ahan thinks she still hasn't settled her bill at the hospital. However, the nurse clarifies that Mori already covered her expenses. All she needs is to sign a couple of forms. Ahan proceeds to do so when she's startled by Mori shouting from outside the hospital. Mori apologizes for reading her diaries at home, but the whole point of the sequence is the two siblings patching things up. Mori basically promises Ahan that he'll take care of her no matter what. It's a sweet and funny scene that culminates with the rest of the hospital's patients shouting at Mori for making so much noise in the middle of the night. We also find out that Daewi's nearby, as he listens to Mori and Ahan's exchange. In the end, Mori promises he'll return to his sister after the God of High School tournament, and Ahan gives him her headband. And with that, the two siblings have their tearful farewells. Next, we get another flashback from not too long ago. This time, we witness what exactly happened when Mujin and Daewi tussled in the middle of the city. We last saw Mujin activating Project Wi-Fi, and it's here that we get to see what this thing can really do. Basically, Project Wi-Fi is made up of a bunch of quantum computers stationed all over the city, which then feed into Mujin's cybernetic arm. These quantum computers can scan their respective areas for borrowed power and sync them with Mujin's arm, effectively allowing him to control multiple borrowed powers at once. In fact, that's exactly what happens when he and Daewi throw down. First, Mujin summons a borrowed power spirit called Giant Bofu. This surprises Daewi, but he manages to dodge its attack. What shocks him even more is when Mujin suddenly pulls out another borrowed power spirit called Giant Kwafu and they start double-teaming Daewi. However, what really grinds our boy's gears is when Daewi also finds out that Project Wi-Fi has the ability to prevent him from using his own powers. So Daewi has to rely on his Kyokushin karate. At the same time, world government agents make full use of Project Wi-Fi by summoning an entire squad of borrowed power spirits for Mujin to use. Things seemingly get so bad that they even manage to channel the three princes of Natak and Okwang himself. Mujin's horde of spirits then gang up on Daewi, but the Kyokushin karate master comes out on top when he uses his trademark martial art to destroy all of the borrowed power spirits that Mujin threw at him. Still, the world president doesn't let up and tries to attack Daewi with his original borrowed power, Longinus. On the other hand, Daewi is able to summon the Sage's Robe before clashing with Mujin. Daewi shows he's an absolute beast when the dust settles, and all Mujin has to show for stepping up to the guy is a severed mechanical arm. Mujin doesn't hide the fact that he's butthurt that he's blown the past 17 years and tons of money on Project Wi-Fi, only to find out that it's not enough to defeat an incomplete version of Okwang, aka Daewi. Their confrontation ends when the two warriors spot Gunduun in the distance. Mujin wonders if it was Dan or Jung who summoned this magical cloud, and that's where his meeting with Daewi comes to a close. That's because the next time we see Mujin, he's already back in his palace talking to the head researcher of Project Wi-Fi. He expresses his disappointment in its ability to defeat Daewi, and the head researcher thinks he's about to be disappeared. But Mujin is nothing if not reasonable. Instead of punishing the head researcher, he tells him to up his efforts in improving Project Wi-Fi, especially its attack power and durability. What's more is that Mujin tells the guy that money is no problem here. The only caveat is that Project Wi-Fi should be finalized within 6 months. He then calls for Executive P to ask about V's whereabouts. P tells him the man has just returned and Mujin steps out of the room to meet with his underling. Meanwhile, Mori has just told his best friend that he plans on using Mujin and his resources to get Ahan's nano treatment, a whole process that involves him being promoted to an executive and claiming the nanomachine perk along the way. However, Daewi is able to convince Mori to not pull through with his plan, given that he knows all too well that Mujin's going to screw him over regardless. Mori hears him out and ultimately decides to join Daewi, asking him what he should do next. In response, Daewi points Mori to the gigantic Yoi pillar in the middle of the ocean and tells him to try and control that thing. In the present, Daewi pays a sleeping Ahan a visit inside her hospital room. He raises his hand in front of her and uses his powers to try and heal the girl. However, we soon find out that Daewi can only provide Ahan with a temporary cure, which makes him realize that not even the sage's wisdom is invincible. Xiao Chen, on the other hand, tells her boss not to be too hard on himself. She explains that not even Okwang himself was able to gain immortality using his own powers alone. He had to involve himself with human technology. Xiao Chen goes on to confirm to Daewi that the existence of Mujin's nanomachine is real. In turn, Daewi remembers the conversation he had with Mujin when they were tussling, which then makes him recall his old friend Sungta. Back to Mori, Daewi tells his best friend to control the towering piece of Yoi in the middle of the ocean. Mori gives it a half-hearted try and quits, telling his best friend it must probably be because his body had gotten ruined after he fought Satan during Ragnarok. Mori goes on to explain that he can't even perform his Jabong Chim techniques anymore and wonders if Mujin's Holy Grail had also caused this. Daewi then asks him about Gunduun and Mori informs him that Jung has control over it. Mori then takes stock of all of his artifacts, and our boy is not in a good place right now. For one, Gundun is not in his possession. Then there's the fact that his gourd had been smashed in the Great War. On top of that, his armor suits are still missing. That is to say, the Monkey King's broke right now. Listening to all this makes Dewi drop a truth bomb on his best friend, that he won't be able to even reach the tournament's semi-finals at his current state, let alone win. So Dewi proposes that they team up to bring down Mujin and grab the nano treatment in the process. Mori has his concerns about this, mainly that he thinks he'll just end up putting Dewi in more trouble if they band together. After all, Mori already blames himself for all the crap that's happened to them. However, Dewi playfully gives Mori a pep talk, telling him that it's going to be like the good old days. But he immediately backpedals and gives his best friend the truth. He needs Mori if he's going to get his revenge on Mujin. As Dewi puts it, taking on Mujin by himself was harder than he initially thought. For one, Dewi noticed that Mujin was able to copy his own abilities when he activated Project Wi-Fi. Then there's the strange resistance that Mujin got against Dewi's abilities, which is also thanks to Project Wi-Fi. Dewi concludes that whatever this edge Mujin has on him can be found inside his cybernetic arm. So he proposes to Mori to participate in the God of High School finals, win the whole thing, and destroy Mujin's arm. Dewi guarantees his best friend that he'll help him retrieve the nanomachine then. Specifically, Dewi's initial plan involves breaking into the venue to steal the nanomachine while Mori handles Mujin. If that fails, there's still Plan B, that Dewi will make use of all of his influence and resources to help Mori and Ahan should Plan A fail. Mori still has doubts about this, since Dewi is basically proposing that they storm Mujin's stronghold. But a mysterious figure suddenly appears and says 4 words, "There's always a way." Somewhere else, V meets Mujin in his throne room while the man regrows his cybernetic arm and confirms that Mori Jung is Jakondasung, aka the Divine Emperor. Mujin then tells V to explain his findings, to which the executive shows the world president footage of Jung's fight with Mori. As he puts it, Jung's proficiency in the use of renewal Taekwondo, his control of the Yoi fragment, and his ability to sung Gondun proves that he's actually Jakondasung. On the other hand, Mujin is curious about the other so-called candidate, Mori Dan. V's not entirely convinced that Dan is the Jakondasung they're looking for and attributes his win against Jung to pure luck. On top of that, V tells Mujin the only reason Dan won against Jung was because Jung was already suffering from headaches when their match started. V goes on to keep pitching Jung as their top Jakondasung candidate, but Mujin really has his eyes on Dan. In response, V tells the world president that the boy's strength comes from his borrowed power, which happens to be the eldest prince of Natak, Ardun. With that, V concludes that Jung is the guy they've been looking for. On the other hand, Mujin is not too thrilled that Manjin has taken Jung away. He suspects V had something to do with it, but V shows him evidence that he was busy fighting against Xiao Chen when all that was going down. Mujin drops the topic and gives V the order to contact the Ministry of Defense and have them raise their satellite surveillance level in Neonox's western camp by 2 levels. Aside from that, V is tasked with keeping an eye on their other candidate, Mori Dan. V obeys and leaves the throne room. Now sure that he's out of earshot, Mujin then orders P to send agents that will keep an eye on V, since he has suspicions that Dewi has another shapeshifter like Xiao Chen working for him. Back to Dewi and Mori, we find out that the mysterious figure who has just approached him is none other than V. Double bluff too, because it turns out that V is actually a Nox agent loyal to Dewi named Peach. Plus, as Mujin suspected, Peach is indeed a shapeshifter. Peach tells Dewi that she's done everything she could to prevent Mujin from finding out that Mori Dan is the real Mori Jin and that he still has no idea that V is working for Dewi. Peach proposes to continue infiltrating the world government, but Dewi reassures her she's done great work. After all, their main objective for now is to distract Mujin. They then proceed with the next part of their plan, which involves Peach using her own borrowed powers to transfer a bit of Ardun's essence into Mori so that Mujin and the rest of the world government will continue to think that Jung is the real Jakondasung. As Peach puts it, Mori now has a small part of Ardun inside him, but he won't be able to use his borrowed power. It's just a mask to hide him from Mujin and his forces. Dewi goes on to explain the same thing and goes over their plan once more. We've already covered this in the previous issue, so we won't go too deep into it. All you should know is that the primary reason Dewi doesn't want to face Mujin alone is because he thinks their confrontation might eventually lead to a second Great War. In any case, Dewi explains that regardless of whether they proceed with Plan A and B, their goals remain the same. First, they're going to get their payback against Mujin, which has been 17 years in the making. And of course, there's acquiring the nanomachine to help treat Ahan's illness. Mori listens to all this and comments on how either plan is centered around his sister. Dewi tells his best friend that it's by design. After all, they can kick Mujin's butt anytime, but Ahan's well-being must come first. Dewi asks Mori to join him in his crusade once more, and the reawakened Monkey King seals their deal with a brotherly handshake. Mori even tells Dewi that he hasn't changed after all these years, which makes Dewi go all emotional and just be thankful that he met a friend like Mori. The two then celebrate their newfound partnership, as Mori proposes they bring Mira back to the loop. But hey, one step at a time. Before their meeting ends, Peach debriefs Mori about the upcoming God of High School tournament. Mainly, she instructs Mori to hide his real identity by pretending to have a difficult time dealing with the other contestants of the competition. Well, this doesn't go exactly as planned. Move the clock forward to 6 months and we get a glimpse of Mori walloping his opponent at the tournament with one blow. Back in the present, something far more insidious is going on inside Mujin's throne room, as we soon learn that Ilpio has mysteriously accepted his offer to become a part of the Six. This effectively turns Ilpio into Mujin's agent, and the world president couldn't be happier that things are going according to his schemes. We then get a much-needed update with what's been happening with Sujin and her anti-world government forces in Balhae. If you didn't know it already, Sujin's Balhae faction have set up their home base in what was once the former Democratic People's Republic of North Korea. What's more interesting is that Sujin is joined by 3 trusty lieutenants who we've known from around the start of the series, namely Ma Bora, Gyeom-ji, and Gang Mansuk. We also find out that Balhae's military doctrine puts a heavy emphasis on pure martial arts instead of relying on borrowed power alone. Ma, Ji, and Mansuk oversee their forces training when Sujin arrives. She tells Mansuk to continue training their men in order to surpass the abilities of the world's borrowed power users. More to the point, Sujin has visited their camp to inform everyone that Mori Jin has re-emerged. As such, she plans on increasing their guerrilla operations against Mujin's world government. You see, Sujin established Balhae as a way to oppose Mujin. That's because she is one of the few people who not only knows the true history of their world during the events of the Great War, but Sujin also feels she has a debt of gratitude towards South Korea, Taijin, and Mori. And she plans on repaying that debt by taking out Mujin. In any case, Sujin tells her forces to prepare and pulls Mansuk for a special mission. Somewhere else, Ilpio helps Mujin strategize on how the world government can deal with the powerful factions who want to bring it and Mujin down. We get another long-winded exposition covering the state of the world. To cut it short, there are 4 powerful factions in existence: Mujin's world government, Sujin's Balhae in the north, Daewoo and Nox to the west, and Mira's Neo-Nox to the east. These 4 factions keep one another in check, but 3 of them share one thing in common: they all hate Mujin's guts. Ilpio goes on to tell Mujin that Daewoo isn't planning on going on an all-out war with him. He just wants Mujin dead. Sujin and Balhae, on the other hand, are actively trying to overthrow Mujin's regime. As for Mira and Neo-Nox, Ilpio tells Mujin that they're a threat, since Mira is working with Manjin. Suffice it to say that Mujin and his world government is surrounded by factions who want nothing more than to see his regime crumble and his head paraded around the streets. There's no way he can deal with any one of them either, since attacking one faction would just leave Mujin's territory open for an attack from the other 2. To remedy this, Ilpio proposes to pit Sujin's Balhae and Mira's Neo-Nox against each other. If that were the case, Ilpio believes that Daewoo would inevitably team up with Mira because of their history. This will end with the 3 other factions squabbling among themselves, leaving Mujin and the world government to destroy everything that's left in their wake. Mujin is impressed with Ilpio's proposal, but asks what would happen if the North, West, and East end up teaming up with one another and directing their combined might towards the world government. Ilpio gives us an ice-cold answer, that his job is to ensure that doesn't happen. While this is happening, Mori arrives at the God of High School tournament's designated dormitories where he's introduced to the facilities. A guide tells him to get on the elevator, but Mori knows he might get found out if they sense Yoi's weight when he enters the lift. So Mori commands Yoi, which he's been hiding in his ear, to get lighter. Still, this isn't enough and the elevator system says it's overloaded. In the end, Mori manages to keep the ruse going and proposes that he'll just take the stairs to get to his room. Later, Mori arrives inside his swanky dormitory and remembers a couple of things that Daewoo told him before arriving. First, Mori has to focus on regaining his martial arts abilities by practicing basic combat forms. As Daewoo puts it, practicing the basics wouldn't just help him regain his lost taekwondo skills, it would also allow him to perfect his acting skills so that no one would find out that he's the real Mori Jin. The second thing Daewoo instructs Mori with is that he has to sleep as much as he can. Unknown to Mori, Mujin and P have their eyes on him as they spy on the boy 24/7. However, P tells Mujin that all Dan has been doing is basic training and sleeping. As for Mori, he's not really putting in those 40 winks most of the time. He actually does image training in bed to remember how to perform his recoilless kick technique the same way he did during his fight with Jung. Somewhere else, Daewoo does some martial arts exercises of his own while Xiao Chen watches. Xiao Chen asks her boss why he continues to train even though he already has the power of the Jade Emperor coursing through his veins. Daewoo tells her that he doesn't want to exclusively rely on Okwang's abilities. He recalls his encounter with Mujin and wonders how that fight would have turned out if they used pure martial arts skills against each other. Daewoo then recalls Mori and hopes for the best. We discover that Daewoo actually met a few of the other so-called Jikona-song candidates in the past. the same ones that Mugen systematically eliminated to ensure that he stays in power. As Dewi puts it, even these candidates who each turned out not to be the real Jakanda-sung were powerful warriors in their own right. He adds that the average standard nowadays has risen compared to the time they first competed in the God of High School tournament. In the end, Dewi states that Mori has no choice but to get much stronger than he is right now if he wants to win the tournament. And that's it, guys. This has been the first arc of God of High School's final season, aka The Battle of the Gods. Again, we're so happy to be back making these videos for you, and we truly appreciate you guys for sticking around to the end of the video. We hope you enjoyed watching it as much as we did making it. As always, drop a comment and let's talk about what you thought about this story. Also, please don't forget to hit that like, share, and subscribe to our channel with your notifications turned on to be the first to see what we have in store for you. Oh, and why not check out the next video while you're at it? We're sure you're going to love it too. We'll catch you real soon, guys.